Hello, and welcome to this clean historical Western romance by Martha Gillcrest. It's great to have you with us. Before we begin, be sure to hit the subscribe button, give this audiobook a thumbs up, and share it with friends. Supporting us in this simple way allows us to share more heartwarming romance stories with you for free. Now, get cozy, relax, and escape into adventure and love with a host of new characters. Enjoy. The following book is the copyright of Martha Gillcrest. A Family for the Outlaw Groom by Martha Gillcrest. Chapter 1. Boston, Massachusetts, 1880. Hurry up with finishing making those rolls, Faye. If we don't sell more this week, it will be your fault. I'm going as fast as I can, Aunt Nora. Faye Clarke brushed a lock of her glossy auburn hair from her cheek with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of flour. She hesitated for a moment, not sure whether to ask her next question, but decided to risk it. Did Uncle Isaac manage to fix the door on the range? He'll get round to it when he's ready. Nora Clarke's expression was frosty as she glared at her niece. I hope you're not blaming your uncle for the downturn of the family bakery. It's not his fault he can't do so much these days. No, of course not, Aunt Nora. Faye turned back to the large mound of dough she was cutting up and rolling into small balls. The heady smell of yeast filled the air, and she sprinkled poppy seeds on top of some of the rolls, which were ready to be baked. They were her specialty, and not so long ago, folks had queued out the door to buy them as fast as they came out of the oven. But the truth was, the corner bakery wasn't doing as well as it used to, not since a rival bakery had opened its doors on the next street. Be sure to clean the place properly when you've finished, Nora added. Her lips were pressed together in their usual thin line of disappointment in Faye's performance. It was something Faye had gotten used to during the 15 years she had lived with them, after her parents died within weeks of each other from a terrible fever. My dear brother Isaac and your Aunt Nora will take good care of you. Think of us fondly after we're gone, and I pray that the Lord will spare your life, my darling girl. Faye could still remember the hoarseness of her ma's voice as she had gasped her last few words to her only daughter. Sometimes she wondered whether it had all been a dream. Faye had also been struck down by the same fever, and her memories from that time were hazy, although, in some ways, she thought perhaps it was a blessing. Losing both her parents had been hard, and she preferred to think of the happier times from when she was a little girl. She opened the oven door carefully and slid the baking tray in, glancing at the clock to note the time. The door sagged slightly, and she propped a piece of wood against it to keep it closed, which was the best she could manage. Isaac had been promising to fix the broken catch for weeks, but if Faye mentioned it, she would be accused of nagging, followed by a tirade of comments about how ungrateful she was for being taken in after her parents had so inconveniently left her orphaned. The bell on the bakery door tinkled to announce a new customer. Mr. Trent, how lovely to see you. Nora's sharp voice changed in an instant as she gave Stanley Trent a broad smile. How's your poor father? Is his health improving? I'm afraid not. Stanley took his hat off and shook his head sorrowfully. The doctor doesn't sound hopeful, and now our housekeeper has upped and left. That's why I'm here to buy a loaf of bread. Faye, get Mr. Trent a fresh loaf, dear. Make sure it's the best one. Nora darted her niece a look to tell her to hurry up before turning back to him. Do you have another housekeeper lined up? A busy man like you shouldn't be troubling himself with cooking and shopping. Stanley handed over a couple of coins. If only I did, he said ruefully. It seems reliable workers are hard to come by these days. Join us for dinner next week. Why don't you? Nora simpered. It will give you a chance to enjoy a home-cooked meal. Faye's a wonderful cook and good about the house, too. Faye blushed as she put the freshly baked loaf of bread into the basket Mr. Trent had put on the counter. He was a good 20 years older than her, and she had always found him rather cold and standoffish, but his eyes lit up at the mention of being invited for dinner. Well, that's very kind of you, Mrs. Clarke. He eyed Faye with a calculated look of interest, which made her feel uncomfortable. I don't suppose you could spare your niece to become my housekeeper, he added with a chuckle. Oh no, we couldn't bear to part with our lovely Faye, Nora said hastily. At least not as a housekeeper. Perhaps something a little more secure. She let the suggestion hang in the air, and Stanley nodded slowly. I see. He smiled thinly as his gaze raked up and down Faye's womanly curves. I need to go and take the rolls out of the oven, Faye blurted out. She lifted her chin and refused to meet her aunt's eye. I hope your pa gets better soon, Mr. Trent, and that you find a new housekeeper. As soon as Mr. Trent had left the bakery, Nora's face returned to its usual sour look. Why did you have to be so short with him? She demanded. Stanley will likely inherit his father's hat-making business when the old man dies. He'd make a good catch for you. Maybe, but I don't like him, Faye muttered. Nora untied her apron in a bad temper. You're almost 24 years old, Faye. Isaac and I have been exceedingly patient, waiting for you to get wed. If you hang around for much longer, it will be too late, and nobody will want you. Least of all, a man of means like Stanley. What do you expect when I spend all my time in the bakery? Faye whispered the words under her breath, wishing she had the courage to say them aloud. Every night after blowing out her candle, she prayed that one day she might have the sort of loving marriage her parents had enjoyed, but her aunt and uncle rarely allowed her any time off, so it felt like an impossibility. What did you say? Nora asked suspiciously. I've never known such an ungrateful young woman. Isaac and I aren't getting any younger, and the way things are going with that wretched Mr. Earnshaw stealing all our customers with his fancy new bakery, we'll be lucky to afford the rent. I'm working as hard as I can, Aunt Nora. It's not enough. Nora rolled her eyes as though Faye was to blame. We need you to marry well, and Isaac has decided that Stanley Trent would make the perfect husband for you. Faye's heart sank. Don't I have any say in the matter? He's old enough to be my father, and he has a reputation. Nonsense, Nora interjected. You shouldn't listen to idle gossip. Maybe he used to be known as a womanizer, but I'm sure that's all in the past. It's high time you were married, and next week's dinner with him should lay the ground nicely. The fact that he's lost his housekeeper gives us the perfect opportunity to tempt him into courting you, and I doubt his pa will live for more than another month. She rubbed her hands, looking happy for once. Let's see, it's February now. Hopefully he'll propose by late spring. Then you can have a summer wedding, and Isaac and I can be rid of this bakery before next winter. You seem to have thought of everything, Faye said forlornly. Oh, indeed we have, my dear. I already knew that Mrs. Broughton had left the housekeeping position in the Trent household, and I figured it was just a matter of time until Stanley would be in to buy bread, as we're cheaper than the other bakery. Isaac and I wouldn't leave something as important as marrying you off to someone wealthy to chance. The following Sunday, Faye wished more than ever that her parents were still alive. As the pastor delivered his sermon, she found her mind drifting now and again, wondering how she could possibly get out of courting the odious Mr. Trent. Her uncle Isaac had been delighted when Nora told him Stanley Trent was coming to dinner. About time, too, he'd said, looking up from his newspaper. We've cosseted you for over 15 years, Faye, out of charity for losing your parents. Although I sometimes wonder whether my sister would have done the same had the shoe been on the other foot. Cosseted? Faye had almost choked on her coffee when she heard Isaac say that. Nobody would have treated you better than we have, Nora said sourly. We've fed and clothed you all these years, and even given you a good job, which is more than most orphans can say. The thundering final words from the pastor brought the church service to an end and snapped Faye out of her daydreaming. Although it was Sunday, it was no day of rest for her. Nora would expect her to clean the house from top to bottom in the afternoon and make a hearty stew to last for the next few days. That was a fine sermon today, don't you think? Nora was in a rare good mood as they walked back through the narrow streets of their neighborhood, which Faye was relieved about. Yes, I enjoyed it. It's nice to meet a few folks after the service as well to chat about this and that. Nora gave her a sharp look, wondering if Faye was hinting that she was bored with their company at home. I guess it doesn't harm to chat a while once a week. You can be very short with the customers, I've noticed. She tweaked Faye's bonnet. Don't let the sun get on your face. Mr. Trent might not appreciate you having freckles. Faye suppressed a sigh. It was a fine day with the first hint of warmth in the air after months, and she liked the feel of the sun on her cheeks. Nora stopped to admire some flowers just coming into bloom, and she risked turning her face upward for a moment as a small act of defiance. Perhaps if I have freckles, Mr. Trent won't want to marry me after all. She smiled to herself, willing them to appear like they often did in the summer. Good morning. It's a lovely day to be outside, isn't it? Dr. Grant strolled past them on his way back to his generous brownstone house near the park. It really is, Faye said. The sunshine is very welcome. I expect you've been busy during the winter, what with all the awful influenza I've been hearing about. She had a soft spot for the gray-haired man who smiled benevolently at her. Dr. Grant had taken care of her parents, and she could still remember how kind-hearted he had been when he'd broken the news that they hadn't recovered. Indeed, it has been a very trying winter, far too many lives lost. The doctor leaned on his silver-topped cane, pausing to catch his breath. How are you getting on, Mrs. Clarke? Is Isaac's bad back getting better now? You know I told you that sitting down all day in his armchair is the worst thing he can do. We're hoping he won't have to work in the bakery for much longer, Nora replied. The doctor looked surprised. Really? I didn't think you would give up when Faye does such a fine job. Her bread is the best in the neighborhood. We're hoping she'll be getting married in the next few months. Nora glanced up and down the street and leaned closer to him. To a wealthy gentleman as well. Her eyes gleamed at the thought of it. When Faye's married, we'll be able to rest at long last. Not before time either. We've done a lot for her all these years, so it's only right she should take care of us in our old age. Dr. Grant smiled broadly. What wonderful news for the family, especially with your particular difficulty, Faye. Prosody-gratulations, my dear. Well, it's not finalized, Faye started. We're delighted about it, Nora said, cutting across Faye hastily. She stopped and looked at the doctor with a puzzled expression. What do you mean? Her particular difficulty? The fever Faye had when she was a child, Dr. Grant said. He looked between the two women as though it was obvious. What about it? Nora tutted. She made a full recovery. That's all in the past. The doctor cleared his throat, suddenly looking awkward. I did explain at the time, but perhaps you forgot. Faye felt a ripple of alarm. I don't remember much about that time, doctor. I'm sorry. What with losing Ma and Pa and then getting used to living with my aunt and uncle, who were very kind taking me in, she added quickly. I'm not surprised, Dr. Grant said gently. He turned to Nora. I told you that often a fever like that can have long-lasting effects for a girl. I mean, a young woman. He cleared his throat again. It can make it hard for them to bear children in some cases. That's why I'm pleased Faye has found a nice gentleman to marry who is willing to accept that there might not be a family as a result of their marriage. A cloud suddenly covered the sun, sucking the brightness out of the day, and Faye blinked back the tears she felt, pricking the back of her eyes. Oh, that? Nora said, waving the doctor's concerns away. Now that you mention it, I do vaguely remember. I'm sure Faye will be fine. She grabbed Faye's arm. We'd better be going, doctor. The house needs cleaning, and there's dinner to make. Of course. Good day to you. As soon as they turned the corner, all pretense at politeness was dropped, and Nora rounded on Faye. Whatever happens, you are not to tell Mr. Trent that you had a fever and that it might mean you can't be with child. Is that clear? Dr. Grant is full of nonsense anyway. He fusses like an old woman, but we don't want anything to spoil your chance of getting married. But that's dishonest. Faye couldn't hide her shock, and tears pooled in her eyes. I always hope to be blessed with children of my own, she said quietly. That's the least of our worries. Nora sighed, and her expression softened slightly. The doctor always likes to look on the worst side of any situation. Goodness knows why. Besides, Stanley Trent won't be interested in women's matters like that. The least he knows about this, the better. For you, perhaps, Faye thought bitterly. She swallowed her disappointment and vowed that she would pray the doctor was wrong every single day in the hope that a miracle might happen. The next few hours passed in a blur of chores for Faye, barely giving her time to process the news. Her heart felt heavy with disappointment at the thought that she might never experience the joy of motherhood. Although she didn't have many friends, two of her acquaintances at church had recently both had a baby. Faye was always the person they turned to if the babies were fussing, telling her she had the knack of soothing them, and she loved to rock them gently, dreaming about when she might one day be doing it with her own baby. I forgot to mention the costermonger delivered these potatoes. You can add them to the stew to make it last longer. Isaac hobbled into the kitchen, making Faye jump. It was rare to see him in there, especially as it was her who did all the cooking for the family these days. Thank you. I'll peel them now. Isaac lingered. Nora tells me that the doctor has some ridiculous notion that you might not be able to bear children. Dr. Grant did say that, yes. It's to do with the fever I had when Ma and Pa were taken. Well, we don't need to dwell on that. What matters more is the future now, Faye. Isaac's bushy eyebrows pulled together in a worried frown, and he gestured at the cane he was leaning on. I'm getting too old to work now. We need you to marry Stanley. His family hat-making business turns a tidy profit, I've heard. Faye nodded and busied herself with putting the muddy potatoes in a bowl of water to clean them. They were wrapped in an old newspaper, which pleased her. Isaac didn't like to waste money on such things, but she would be able to brush the mud off and read it later. I have to insist that you don't tell Stanley about what the doctor said to you when he comes to dinner. You want me to lie to him? It's not lying, really, Isaac blustered, his cheeks turning red. He turned and hobbled away, muttering about her ingratitude. As you wish. Faye suppressed a shudder of dislike as she thought about Stanley and his cold demeanor, but then a smile played on her mouth as something occurred to her. If he thinks I can't bear children, perhaps he won't want to marry me after all. That's my way out of being wed to him. She hastily peeled and chopped the potatoes, adding them to the stew, then brushed the dried mud off the newspaper. As she stirred the stew absent-mindedly, she flicked the pages to see if anything took her interest. Suddenly, she saw a page titled Brides Wanted Out West by Matrimonial Agencies. She stopped stirring and looked more closely. It was a whole page of advertisements for gentlemen in the frontier lands seeking mail-order brides. The breath caught in her throat as she realized that perhaps there was a way she could single-handedly escape from her uncle's plans to marry her off to Stanley Trent and forge a new life for herself on her own terms instead. For a moment, she felt giddy with excitement, but then her emotions plummeted again. Who would want to marry a woman who can't have children? Faye sighed before turning to her faith, hoping for inspiration. Lord, if it's your will that I can't have a family of my own, I accept it. But if there's some way I could at least be happily married, please show me how. Chapter 2. Rocky River, Wyoming, 1880. Jesse Rogers leaned on the top rail of his fence and surveyed the land around him with quiet satisfaction. The snow had just melted after a winter that felt like it might go on forever, and he saw the first haze of green in the paddocks as the warmth of the sun encouraged the first tentative signs of spring. He lifted his hat up and dragged his arm across his forehead to wipe the sweat away, feeling the satisfying ache of a good day's work in his broad shoulders. The fence was mended just how he liked it, and his small herd of cattle would be safely contained. Beyond his animals, he could see the spread of fields that would be used to grow wheat later in the year. They had lain fallow over the winter, but God willing, they would be filled with a crop of swaying golden heads, fat with grain, by the end of summer. He turned and leaned his back against the fence to look at his newest project. Where a dusty yard had been for the last few years now stood an impressive barn. Every plank and shingle had been nailed in place by his own two hands, but it was more what was inside that filled him with hope for the future of the place. He had set up Rocky River's first steam engine-driven flour mill. Sure, it was just one engine. He had started small, but it had caused a few tongues to wag nonetheless. What do you want with one of those newfangled things? That had been the gist of most of the questions folks in town had asked him. They're not so new in the bigger towns, Jesse had replied. We don't want Rocky River to get left behind, do we? After completing the build, for the first few weeks, he thought he'd misjudged it and made a terrible mistake, as the local ranchers and farmers avoided meeting his eye. But then Cassius Moore had stopped by to casually ask if Jesse might be able to grind up his wheat so he could supply flour to a bakery his cousin ran. Maybe a couple of times a month, he'd suggested. And not to be outdone, another big rancher had gotten wind of Cassius's arrangement and called by a few days later to ask for something similar. Now, almost a year after he'd built the mill, he had a steady supply of customers. It earned him enough money to make up for the fact that his ranch wasn't large. Spreading the risk and diversifying, that's what his pa would have called it, with a twinkle in his eye, except he would have meant something different. Yes, John Rogers would have been proud to see his son Jesse settled just on the edge of Rocky River. The thought made Jesse's good mood momentarily evaporate. He'll never know or see that Ma and I found a good place to call home. His heart felt heavy with the weight of regret. It had been almost 10 years since Jesse had seen his father felled like a mighty oak being uprooted in a storm. He'd been shot in cold blood. One minute he'd been full of vitality, the next, spread-eagled on the dusty ground in front of him, his eyes already lifeless. Jesse had only been coming up to 20 years old then, but the passage of time hadn't done much to ease the loss. Or the guilt, he thought to himself with a sigh. If only I could turn back the clock, he muttered to himself. His horse, Robin, fidgeted nearby. What am I saying, boy? He added, shaking his head and glad of the interruption to the path his thoughts might have taken. It's too late to change the past. He unhitched the corral gate and sent the dappled gelding out to join the others. There was Lady, his ma's old mare, and Cooper, the young colt he was in the process of breaking, and the three of them kicked up the dust as they pawed the ground and galloped just for the sheer joy of feeling the sun on their backs. Jesse stood watching them, but he wasn't really seeing the horses. He was seeing the twinkle in his pa's eyes that had been so cruelly snuffed out. We were both at fault, Jesse thought. The familiar anger returned. Pa should have known better than to get tangled up with the Whitley gang, and I should have known better than to cross Bill Whitley. He sighed again, growing tired of the memories he could never quite shake off. Maybe nobody was to blame. His pa had fallen on hard times and gotten carried away with the idea of making easy money to care for his family. And him? Looking back, Jesse could acknowledge that he had been little more than a kid, full of misplaced admiration for the coins which suddenly jingled in his pa's pockets again, without understanding the price of hitching their hopes to the Whitley brothers until it was too late. A fluttering tea towel caught his eye, and he turned just in time to see his ma waving to him from the veranda of their log cabin. "Dinner's ready, son. Are you done with work for today?" He grinned and pushed himself away from the fence, picking up his hammer and the wooden box he kept his nails in. "On my way now, Ma." Elena Rogers waited for him while he washed his hands under the pump, taking a moment to enjoy the view. It was one she never tired of, mostly because it represented her boy making something of his life, but also because she liked the backdrop of rugged mountains beyond their land and the town. "Is something on your mind, Jesse?" she asked lightly as he ambled toward her. "I swear you were staring up at the sky for a full 5 minutes while those horses were racing around. Anything I should know about?" "It's nothing, Ma. Just enjoying the day." She nodded, not fooled for one moment. "Work, work, work. I know that look on your face," she said, chiding him as she bustled through to the kitchen. "It's about time you had other things to think about than the mill and your animals." "It's hardly work if I enjoy thinking about those things," he shot back, his mouth lifting in a smile to show he meant it as a joke. "Robin's good company. All he ever wants from me is a bucket of oats or a handful of hay." "You know what I mean," Elena said, sounding exasperated. "Hang up your hat and take this pot of beef stew to the table for us, will you?" She followed him with a dish of cornbread and put it next to a plate of cabbage. The china clinked as she set it down, and Jesse noticed that she seemed a little breathless from the exertion. "Never mind me and my work. What about you, Ma? Are you feeling okay today?" He knew that was about as direct as he could get if he hoped for an answer. Elena pursed her lips and darted a troubled look in his direction. It was all he needed to know. Tell me honestly, Ma. We promised we would never keep secrets from each other after what happened to Pa, didn't we? He reached across and took her hand in his, noticing there was a faint tremor, like the palpitation of a frightened bird. I don't want to worry you, son, she said quietly. I visited the doctor when we went to town last week. Uh-huh. Jessie's eyebrows lifted a fraction. That was why she had been quiet all week. What did he say? It's nothing, Elena replied, unconsciously mimicking what he had said to her a few minutes earlier. Well, it's just old age is all. My heart is a little irregular, he said, to be expected after having some of those ailments over the years. She shrugged. I guess it comes to us all, sooner or later, but he said I should make the most of what time I have. Jessie felt his own heart clench at her words. She didn't need to spell out what the doctor was actually saying, but it still came as a shock. After losing his pa too soon, he had somehow imagined his ma would always be with him. But now, as he took a moment to really look at her properly, he noticed the shadows under her faded green eyes and the way her mouth pinched slightly with pain as she tried to catch her breath. She had gotten old and frail right under his nose, and he had been too busy working to see it. That's not what's bothering me, she said, shrugging again. It's you I'm worried about. It's up to the Lord when my time comes, not Dr. Mundy, no matter how highly he thinks of himself. Jessie chuckled, despite himself. The town doctor could be a little pompous, but he meant well. You don't need to worry about me, Ma. I'm happy with how the ranch and the mill are going. And don't I have the best beef stew and cornbread to fill my belly? He eyed the food hungrily as she ladled a generous portion onto his plate. What's more important is telling me what I can do to help you. You can make some changes. That's what, Elena said, giving him a direct look. She never minced her words, which he usually appreciated. But this time, he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Only having a horse and an old woman for company is no way for a man of your age to live, Jessie. And what about when I'm gone? Let's not get into that now, Ma. Jessie felt mean for being curt, but he knew what she was angling at. You always say that, son. But when can I talk about it if not now? Tomorrow might be too late if the doctor is right. She rested her hand on top of his and squeezed it to soften her words. I can rest easy if I know you're not alone, son. I just want to see you happy. Settled and married, you mean? Jessie took a deep breath, determined not to let the conversation turn into an argument. Now that he was nearing 30, it was a topic that Elena brought up frequently, and he cared for his ma enough to appreciate that she did it from a kind heart, but he couldn't allow himself to be swayed. He couldn't take a wife, and he definitely didn't deserve a family of his own. He thought quickly for something which would placate her. You know, as well as I do, that good women are few and far between out here. The only single ones are saloon ladies who wouldn't last 5 minutes on a ranch, even if we're only a few miles from town. I know, son. That's what you always say. But I have a better idea. What? Stop mentioning it. Hope someone has a suitable sister hidden away that we don't know about yet? Jessie smiled and shook his head, but the glint in Elena's eyes told him she was just getting into her stride. Of course not, she said, tapping his hand lightly with amusement. I saw Mrs. Devereaux after I visited the doctor. Sounds like it was a busy trip to town. Jessie muttered. She told me that the Briscoe brothers all found themselves a bride by placing an advertisement in the Matrimonial Times. She took care of it for all 5 of them. Can you believe it? All 5? Even Jessie couldn't hide his surprise. Those brothers can hardly agree what day of the week it is without falling out, let alone getting 5 new ladies to get along harmoniously at their homestead. I hope you're not suggesting I might have one of them when she gets fed up with whoever she was unlucky enough to wed? If Mrs. Devereaux can find 5 single ladies to travel from the East Coast all the way to Wyoming to marry the Briscoe men, surely she can do even better for you, son? Her expression was serious. Please, Jessie, you have so much to offer a wife. I just know this could be your chance. We both know that's not true. His voice was leaden with defeat. It wouldn't be right to bring some poor woman out west to Rocky River. To me. Elena lowered her head for a moment as though searching for the right words. When she looked up again, He could see the pain cloud her eyes. "Jesse, this has to stop. What happened with Angeline Whitley was not your fault. You were so young, and you thought you were doing the right thing by her and her daughter, Lily." Jesse flinched slightly at the mention of their names as the memories came flooding back. Angeline had married young to Bill Whitley, the leader of the Whitley gang, and they had a golden-haired daughter called Lily. But Bill had grown increasingly jealous, lashing out every time he thought another man so much as looked at his wife. Angeline had turned to Jesse for comfort, and an innocent love had blossomed between them. Jesse dreamt of the day he could help her and Lily escape Bill's violent outbursts. He even harbored hopes that one day in the future he could marry Angeline and raise Lily as his own daughter with the love and respect they deserved. But all that had ended the day Bill caught them in an embrace. Bill Whitley's jealousy knew no bounds, and he was convinced that Lily was Jesse's child, no matter how strenuously Jesse denied it, and Angeline pleaded with him to see sense. He could still remember the terror in Angeline's eyes late at night when Jesse urged her to leave with Lily for her own safety. A week later, Bill had bragged that she had gotten her comeuppance at the hands of the McMahons, a rival gang of outlaws. "That'll teach her to think she can get the better of me, Jesse," he had snarled. Then not long after, when John had tried to walk away from the gang with Jesse, telling Bill that he wanted out before the law caught up with them, Bill had pulled his revolver and shot him in cold blood. Nobody walks away from Bill Whitley unless I say so. Jesse could hear that rasping voice to this very day, almost 10 years later. He had managed to escape with Elena the day after his pa's funeral. After constantly being on the move, it was only years later that Jesse decided they had run for long enough, and they started to rebuild a life for themselves in Rocky River. Elena watched the emotions chasing across her son's face. "You're not the same person you were back then, Jesse," she said softly. "You've grown up and become an upstanding, kind-hearted man. You deserve to be happy, just like anyone else. I can't go through losing someone I love again, Ma, especially not a child. I loved Angeline, but it was losing little Lily that hurt more than anything. Bill Whitley laughed in my face when he told me they were shot." "I understand, son," Elena said, "but won't you at least think about it? I want to see you with a good woman by your side before I die." She saw him shift uneasily at the bluntness of her words and pressed home her advantage. "It would give me peace of mind, Jesse. After losing your father, it's all I've ever wanted for you." Jesse knew when he was beaten, and he did want to make his ma happy. She deserved it after everything she'd been through. "I promise I'll think about it. I might even speak to Mrs. Devereaux next time I'm in town. How about that?" Elena scooped another ladle of stew onto his plate, smiling at him. "Thank you. That's all I hoped you would say." The following day, as he rode into town with sacks of flour stacked in the back of his wagon, the conversation drifted through his mind again. He knew some of the local men had gotten nice brides through the services of Mrs. Devereaux's matrimonial agency, but had never paid much attention because after losing Angeline and Lily, he had sworn it would be better to stay single. He liked his new life, even if sometimes the evenings could be lonesome. "A woman would want to know about the past," he muttered to himself, scarcely noticing that he was talking out loud. "And raking up the past will only lead to heartache." The clopping of Robin's hooves on the dusty road usually soothed his worries, but this time he was finding it hard to settle. Elena's failing health had unlocked emotions he had long since shut away. Maybe Ma's right. He imagined coming home after a hard day's work to be greeted by a lovely wife waiting for him on the veranda. It would be nice to see her face light up with a smile and to share news about their day as they sat by the fire on a cold winter's night, or to stroll through the meadow hand in hand in the summer, watching the sun setting behind the mountains. He glanced over his shoulder at the sacks of flour. They would be delivered in no time. Other than calling in at the mercantile for a few bits and pieces for Elena, there was nothing else he needed to do. He could speak with Mrs. Devereaux, just out of curiosity. An hour later, Jesse was being ushered into Mrs. Devereaux's cozy office. "You heard about my success with the Briscoe brothers, did you?" Her ringlets bobbed as she gave a tinkling laugh. I just figured I'd ask how it works. This, whatever you do, Jessie said, gesturing awkwardly at the ledger on the desk between them. I'm sure your dear mother must be delighted that you've decided to settle down. And trust me, Jessie, I know we'll get you a match in no time. She picked up her fountain pen and smiled again. I haven't made up my mind, he said gruffly. He jumped up, feeling suddenly too hot in the office. Of course you haven't. It's not something to do lightly, Mrs. Devereaux purred. You have the ranch and the mill to think of. But I suppose you have to ask yourself what it's all for when you're alone on the long winter nights. Jessie stopped pacing and looked at her. It was as if she'd read his thoughts. I don't want children, he blurted out. Do with that information what you will, but make it clear. No children, no family. With that, he slapped some coins onto her desk and gave her a defiant look. He had kept his promise to his ma, in a fashion. Mrs. Devereaux merely smiled and nodded. She had heard all manner of strange requests from her gentleman clients, although she couldn't help but wonder why the perfectly pleasant Jesse Rogers was so adamant he didn't want children. Leave it with me. I'll let you know when you have some replies to the advertisement. Right. Well, I'd better be on my way. Jesse jammed his Stetson back on his head and strode out of the office back into the fresh air. He wondered whether he would have the dubious honor of being the first person Mrs. Devereaux would fail to find a match for. Chapter 3, Boston, Massachusetts. We're delighted to have you as part of our family, Stanley. Isaac reached across the table and shook Stanley Trent's hand. I think this calls for a glass of something to celebrate. Nora gestured for Faye to pour 2 glasses of port for Stanley and Isaac. Try to look pleased, she hissed, joining Faye at the sideboard. Sorry, it's just happened much faster than I thought it would. Faye felt as though she might never manage to smile again. She tried to summon an expression that would disguise the revulsion she felt every time she looked at the man who had just announced he would marry her. As it happened, it didn't really matter. Stanley barely glanced at her other than to accept the port, gulp it down, and then hold his glass out for a refill. I must apologize for Faye's outburst about not being able to bear children. She's gotten it into her head from something that Dr. Grant said, but I'm sure it's just nonsense. Isaac watched Stanley closely to make sure he understood. I don't care about that, Stanley said, waving his concerns away. So the wedding, when do you think it should be? Nora asked eagerly. Well, there's no point in waiting. It will save me from having to look for a housekeeper. How about next week? Faye gasped with shock. So soon? Surely you don't want to rush into anything, Mr. Trent. Stanley leaned back in his chair and gave her a thoughtful look. Pa's getting sicker by the day, and the chores are stacking up. Nobody else would take you on, Faye, so we may as well get married as soon as possible, unless you think I should look elsewhere for a bride. Oh no, certainly not, Nora said hastily, as Isaac looked alarmed at the thought of losing his way out of leaving the bakery. Next week will be perfect, and Faye will be delighted to marry you. Might you have room in that grand house of yours for us one day? Isaac asked. He rubbed his knees. My arthritis is worse than ever, and there's no point in us paying rent on this house when you have so much space. Possibly. Stanley stood up. Or perhaps I'll take over the bakery myself. It will give Faye something to do when she's not looking after me. We can discuss all that after the wedding. The following morning, Faye disconsolately peeled more potatoes for their evening meal. She had already been up for hours to make the day's bread and cakes for the bakery, and weariness seeped through her bones. Is this all I have to look forward to now? She muttered under her breath. Marrying Stanley would be swapping one life of drudgery for another, but with even more demands on her time. It sounded like she was expected to be his housekeeper, care for old man Trent, and still run the bakery. No wonder Stanley and her aunt and uncle had jumped at the idea. She chopped up the last few potatoes and dropped them into the stew. It wasn't that she was afraid of hard work. Quite the opposite. Her parents had raised her to know that it was the way to get ahead. But what rankled her was having no choice in her own future. She wanted to have a husband who looked at her with love in his eyes, the way she remembered her pa looking at her ma. If she couldn't have children of her own, Was that too much to ask? Also, a few discreet inquiries had told her that Stanley's womanizing days were far from over. She already knew it would never be a happy marriage. A breeze from the open kitchen window rustled the newspaper that the potatoes had come in, which was still lying on the table, pulling her out of her gloomy thoughts. She leafed through the first few pages to take her mind off things. Her pa used to enjoy reading the newspaper, and it reminded her of him, making her smile. There was so much happening beyond her life in the bakery. A new owner taking over the warehouses at the docks, a train robbery that had caused consternation for all concerned. It looked like minor royalty from one of the European countries was visiting soon, and there were still gentlemen seeking mail-order brides to travel out west. Her fingers stopped at this last part. Could I? Travel to the frontier lands to marry? Faye's heart hammered in her chest, and she scurried to close the kitchen door before returning to the crumpled newspaper again with a surge of excitement. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the page flat and brushed some dried mud away. It's so far away, but at least Mr. Trent wouldn't bother to come after me, she whispered to herself, weighing up the pros and cons. I could marry someone of my own choosing, but who would want me? The clock ticked loudly, and she knew she only had a few more minutes to herself before she would need to return to the bakery. Suddenly her gaze rested on a small advertisement in the corner of the page. It looked almost as though it didn't want to be noticed. 30-year-old owner of a small ranch and flour mill in Rocky River, Wyoming, offers a secure and comfortable home to a hard-working young lady who would like to marry. No children, now or in the future. Reply here. Her breath caught in her throat, and she reread it, and then reread it again. A gentleman, not much older than she was, who wanted to marry and didn't want children. She rubbed her eyes, blinking back sudden tears of relief. It was as if every word of the advertisement had been written just for her. She ripped the corner of the page off and stuffed it hastily in her apron pocket. She would think about it overnight, sleep on it, and pray for guidance. The rest of the day dragged by until, finally, she could retreat to the privacy of her small room under the eaves. Faye paced back and forth, 8 steps each way. Wyoming? She tried to recall a conversation she had overheard at church the previous year when 2 ladies had been talking about their friend who had moved there. Wide open spaces, mountains, and lakes. That was all she could remember. But at least I'll be free of Stanley Trent, she muttered. I can't stay here and marry him just to please Uncle Isaac. They don't care whether I'm happy or not, just that they can use me to better their own lives. She pulled her carpet bag out from under her bed. The last time it had been used was the day she had arrived after her parents died. She opened it and pulled out the few items of jewelry her ma had left her. They were tucked away in the inner pocket, wrapped in a scrap of her old shawl. Seeing them helped her come to a decision. Ma would want me to be happily married, not miserable with Mr. Trent. She heard the clock striking 5 in the downstairs hall. Isaac would be dozing by the fire, and Nora had gone to her friend's house down the street to tell her about Stanley's proposal. It was now or never, and Faye knew that if she hesitated, she might regret it for years to come. She wrenched open the drawers next to her narrow bed and stuffed her clothes into the carpet bag, not giving herself time to lose courage. Finally, she added the family Bible and a small painting of her parents, which she laid carefully on top and then covered with a folded shawl. Faye's steps were light on the stairs as she tiptoed down. Sure enough, she could hear Isaac's deep snores from within the parlor. She glanced around the hallway for one last time, inwardly saying goodbye to the house and its inhabitants. Her Aunt Nora would find a letter from her later that evening, which she had left tucked under her pillow, thanking them for providing a home and explaining that she had left in order to forge her own future. She hadn't said anything about Wyoming, just to be doubly sure Mr. Trent couldn't come and find her. As soon as she was hurrying down the street, Faye felt the first hint of relief wash over her. She headed straight to the pawn shop and handed over the jewelry. "Are you sure you want to do this, ma'am?" The old man behind the counter gave her a curious stare. "These pieces are pretty decent. I can give you a good price for them." "Yes, please, sir." Faye felt a pang of regret as she handed over the brooch. she could still remember her ma wearing it. Plus, there were a locket and 2 rings. The money was a little more than she had expected, and she shot him a grateful smile before hiding the coins safely in her dress. The man eyed the carpet bag on her arm. "Getting out of here, are you? Good luck." Faye tried not to let the doubts that crowded into her mind slow her down as she hurried toward the station. The advertisement had asked for replies to be sent to Mrs. Devereaux's matrimonial agency, but there was no time for that. Her mind whirled with questions that she couldn't answer. What if this gentleman turns out to be no better than Stanley Trent? Suppose he's already had a slew of replies from other ladies and proposed to one of them already? The only way out of her predicament was for her to travel to Rocky River as quickly as possible and present herself to Mrs. Devereaux in person. It was a little unconventional, but she had no choice. If her aunt and uncle suspected she was running away, they would probably force her to marry Stanley immediately, and she would be stuck with him forever. As the train station came into sight, she faltered, still feeling overwhelmed with indecision. She figured she had enough money to pay for her journey west, plus a bit left over to stay at an inexpensive boarding house for a couple of weeks if necessary. In a sudden attack of nerves, she wondered whether it would be better to find a boarding house in Boston and send a letter of reply after all. "Excuse me, ma'am." A man pushed past. "Are you going or not? You're blocking the way, and if you don't move, I might miss the train." "Pardon me." She watched the man as he walked decisively into the station and then gazed around at the bustling streets. The sunshine of the last few days had disappeared, and a thick fog was blowing in off the sea, making her shiver. No, time was of the essence. Her uncle knew so many people in town that there was a good chance she might be spotted, so she had to get the first train out of Boston. "Besides, what have I got to lose?" she muttered, lifting her chin. She gripped her bag tightly and strode forward. If it didn't work out, she was sure she would be able to find work at a bakery out west. A few days later, Faye leaned forward and smiled at the woman sitting opposite her in their carriage. "Would you like me to hold her for you, Jillian?" The woman grinned with relief. "Yes, please." She passed her baby across to Faye and then yawned. "I honestly don't know how I would have managed this journey without you." "It's no bother," Faye replied softly. She settled the baby into the crook of her arm, and they both gave a contented sigh. "Rose has certainly taken to you." Jillian stood up to stretch her legs and brush the creases out of her dress. "Mrs. Higgins, my old landlady, used to complain that she could hear Rose crying morning, noon, and night, but she barely whimpers when you have her. She's a little poppet." Faye looked down at the way Rose's eyelashes fanned on her plump pink cheeks as she slept and felt a powerful surge of longing in response. "I would give anything to have a baby as gorgeous as Rose," she added. "You won't say that when you've gotten your own babies and they've kept you up all night." "I might not be able to have children of my own," Faye murmured. "That's what the doctor told me." Jillian huffed and rolled her eyes. "Maybe it's a blessing in disguise. I never meant to get myself in the family way. It was that silver-tongued gentleman at the saloon who caused it all." Faye blushed at Jillian's frank admission and also felt a stab of hurt that her travel companion had this perfect baby girl, yet didn't seem to want her. She had made no secret of the fact that Rose had been born out of wedlock, and she was more than happy for Faye to cradle her as often as she wanted. "Your new husband doesn't mind about you having a baby?" Jillian shrugged, and there was something about her expression that Faye couldn't quite put her finger on. She looked sly. "Does he know you're bringing baby Rose with you?" Faye asked. Jillian sat down again with a thump. "Of course not," she said crossly. "You know what men are like. It doesn't take much to spook them, and I don't want to spoil my chances of getting married." "But what if your fiancé doesn't want Rose?" Faye couldn't hide her shock. "I'll worry about that when the time comes," Jillian said airily. She stood up again. "I'm going to walk down the carriage if you don't mind having Rose for a bit longer. That conductor was giving me the glad eye." "Jillian, you're a terrible flirt." Faye couldn't help but chuckle as Jillian tossed her curls. "I'm just keeping my options open in case I don't like the look of my husband-to-be. It's one of the dangers of being a mail-order bride, ain't it? Besides, the conductor is rather handsome. Faye was grateful that Jillian was gone for some time, as it gave her another chance to enjoy the weight of Rose in her arms. When she woke up, she gave her some milk out of a bottle as Jillian had shown her how to, and she hummed a lullaby to help her drift off to sleep again. We're almost at Cody Plains. Jillian sounded breathless when she came back to their carriage. Will you look after Rose just while I get my luggage off and make sure that my fiancé has arrived to pick me up? She asked. Rose will only fuss if I have her with me, and I don't want to make the wrong impression. Of course. Faye nodded and sat up straighter as the small town of Cody Plains came into view. I'll wait in the carriage with her until you're ready. Jillian twirled her ringlets around her fingers and pinched her cheeks to make them pinker. Do I look okay? I feel as if we've been traveling for weeks. I hope Gerald has a nice hot bath ready for me at his house, after we visited the preacher to get married, of course. You look lovely. Jillian's excitement was infectious, and as the train screeched to a halt, Faye started to feel her own excitement mounting too. She had an extra couple of days of traveling to reach Rocky River, but it already felt as though Boston was a lifetime ago. Faye strolled up and down the carriage when the train stopped, rocking Rose gently in her arms as she waited for everyone to disembark. She was so entranced by Rose's little button nose and bright blue eyes that she scarcely noticed whether Jillian had met Gerald or not. Time seemed to stand still when she was with Rose, and she wanted to savor every last moment before Jillian came back into the carriage to fetch her baby. Time to sit down again. Hudsonville is our next stop. Hudsonville, ladies and gentlemen, sit down while the train pulls away. The conductor's shout made Faye jump as she realized more time had passed than she thought. He yelled his instructions again, but it was almost drowned out by the shriek of the train's whistle. But wait. Faye grabbed hold of a seat as the train juddered forward. Stop, she cried. What is it, ma'am? The conductor bore down on her, looking cross. You need to sit down. It's not safe standing up when the train gets going, especially not with a baby in your arms. This part of the journey can be pretty rough after the rails were damaged in the winter storms. You have to stop the train? Faye gasped. She bent down slightly to peer out of the window, but it was impossible to see the platform through the billowing steam. Jillian was meant to come and get her baby from me. I was only looking after Rose while she met her sweetheart. That lady with the red hair, you mean? The conductor asked. Yes, that's Jillian. We met on the journey. The conductor gave Faye a rueful look. I know the one. She's been flirting with me, even though I told her I'm happily married. He gestured for Faye to return to her seat. She's long gone, ma'am. Her fellow picked her up as soon as she stepped off the train, and I saw the wagon headed up the street with them both in it. But what about Rose? Faye wondered if the conductor was playing some sort of joke on her. Seems to me it was you holding her every time I passed through your carriage these last few days. I was just helping Jillian. She said Rose settled better with me. The conductor rolled his eyes slightly. Is that her basket in the corner, with the bottles of milk in it? Faye's mouth gaped open as she saw that Jillian had left the basket behind. There was a note tucked under the muslin cloth, and she pulled it out. You make a far better mother than me, Faye. I'll only end up making a mess of things if I keep Rose, so I trust you'll look after her. Have her with my blessing. Love from Jillian. I don't believe it. She's gone off with Gerald and left Rose behind. Faye didn't know whether to be angry or delighted and blinked hastily to hide her tears. You poor little thing, she crooned, looking down into Rose's innocent blue eyes, which were regarding her solemnly. I promise I won't let you come to any harm. She peered out of the window again, but Cody Plains was already receding far into the distance. Do you think I should tell the sheriff at the next stop? She asked the conductor. She glanced down at Rose again, praying that he would say no. The conductor leaned over and read the note and then shrugged. You'd be surprised how often this happens, he said, patting her shoulder kindly. I guess it's up to you whether you keep her or not. It's a big responsibility, but for what it's worth, I'm inclined to agree with what Jillian put in her note. You look like a natural mother to me, and I'm rarely wrong. Faye leaned back in her seat, and felt a sense of peace wash over her. "Are you the answer to my prayers, Rose?" She thought about all the times she had prayed. Dr. Grant's comment about her not being able to have children might be wrong. And here she was with baby Rose in her arms and Jillian's blessing to keep her. It might not have happened how she expected, but Faye's heart was overflowing with joy as she realized this was her chance to become a mother after all. Chapter 4. Rocky River, Wyoming. Bill Whitley placed one booted foot on top of the rocky outcrop and leaned forward to survey the bustling town of Rocky River beneath him in the distance. He could see the main street, busy with wagons and horses as folks went about their shopping, and smaller streets spreading out haphazardly in every direction. He already knew there was a mercantile, a post office that offered a relatively new telegraph service, a handful of saloons, plus the usual dressmakers, cobblers, blacksmiths, fur traders, and general stores. His gaze traveled along the main street, past the boarding houses and 2 hotels, to a squat building, the jail and sheriff's office. He would have to make sure to avoid that. "What are you doing?" Frank, his brother, stumbled toward him, still shaking off the effects of too much rough whiskey the night before. "Just looking," Bill growled. "It's busy. But there are enough new folks coming and going that we can blend in without sparking too much curiosity." Frank harumphed. "Looks a bit too sleepy for my liking. Give me a big town any day. It's much easier to lay low someplace where folks don't want to know your business all the time." "There's no pleasing you," Bill commented. He spat into the dirt and pulled a face. He agreed with his brother, although he would never admit it. He couldn't wait to get out of Wyoming and head back to California, but the sparse towns and transient nature of folks settling in Rocky River from far and wide suited him for now. It was the perfect place to hide out, especially when a certain bounty hunter called Levi Ware was doggedly pursuing them. It wasn't just Bill who Levi was after, though. It was the whole Whitley gang, such that it was. Bill was the head of it. Then there was Frank, his younger brother, and finally Burton, their cousin. He tried not to think about how small their numbers were now. Enough of us to make trouble. Small enough to get away with our crimes without attracting attention. At least, that's what he told himself. He scowled as he glanced at Burton, who was still snoring by the ashes of the fire. His cousin was a late addition, and Bill had only allowed him to join the gang out of desperation after that fiasco with John Rogers and his low-down snake of a son, Jesse. The thought of it still gave him sleepless nights. You give a man a chance to make easy money and treat him and his boy like family, and then they turn like a rabid dog and bite the hand that feeds them. "Are you thinking about Jesse Rogers again?" Frank gave his brother a troubled look as he saw the way Bill's jaw was clenching. "What if I am?" Bill snarled. He pushed himself off the rocky outcrop and strolled back to their makeshift camp. They had been there a week already, and it sat in a slight hollow, surrounded by trees. It was high enough to give them a good vantage point over the town and to see anyone approaching, but sheltered enough that they wouldn't be seen by anyone who might be passing. Not that he expected anyone to come across them. He prided himself on being able to live practically invisibly within the communities they plundered and stole from. "Isn't it high time you let go of the past, Bill?" Frank scuffed his boots as he trailed behind his brother, which only added to Bill's irritation. "Keep out of it," he snapped. "I'll make sure Jesse gets what he deserves when the time comes. Meantime, we need to stay out of Levi's way. That's more important." "Surely you got your revenge when you shot Jesse's pa." Burton rubbed his eyes as he sat up, just catching the end of the conversation. "Sort yourself out, and don't talk about what doesn't concern you." Bill threw another log on the fire and kicked it with his boot to reignite the embers. He looked disdainfully down at his cousin, noticing his bleary eyes and disheveled state. Sometimes he wished he could travel alone. He knew Frank and Burton didn't have the same fire in their guts for revenge that he had. But then it wasn't their woman who had been unfaithful with Jesse Rogers. But they were useful to cover his back in a gunfight. He reminded himself. "Jesse was barely a man when it happened," Frank said, trying to reason with Bill. "And you said you never really loved Angeline, and having a baby daughter was slowing you down." Bill clenched his fists and paced back and forth. Frank's incessant chatter was driving him into the familiar rage that clawed at his heart whenever he thought about Jesse Rogers. "You know the rule I live by. Nobody ever walks away from Bill Whitley." "Unless you say so," Burton and Frank muttered in unison. "Exactly." Bill's fingers hovered over the gun on his hip, and he glared at them. "You'd do well to remember that, too." Frank looked apologetic and held up his hands to placate his brother. "How about I brew up some coffee? There are some rice and beans left over from last night as well. Reckon we could all do with something to eat, huh?" Burton jumped up and hurried away to fetch more wood for the fire. There was no accounting for Bill when his hand twitched over his gun like that. He'd seen Bill kill a man just for looking at him wrong, and he didn't fancy his chances when Bill was in a rage about his arch-enemy, Jesse. He and Frank should have known better than to bring the subject up. It was the one thing guaranteed to make Bill twitchy. Bill watched dispassionately as the other two men scurried around to see to the chores. He could have helped them, but now and again, it did them good to remember who was in charge, and his thoughts returned to the current predicament they found themselves in. He sighed and rubbed a hand wearily across his eyes. He hadn't been sleeping too well lately. He found when he closed his eyes, too many ghosts appeared before him. Men he had killed on a whim, and always Angeline's heart-shaped face and Lily's golden curls. A preacher would no doubt say it was his guilty conscience, but Bill Whitley was just plain tired from being on the run all these years. He wanted to settle down someplace he could be anonymous, but he knew he would never be able to until he'd taken care of one last piece of business. Frank was right when he said that he hadn't really cared about losing Angeline. As far as he was concerned, she and the baby had gotten to feel like a tether holding him back from his grand plans. But that didn't make it right for Jesse Rogers to steal them from under my nose. Who does he think he is? No, he would deal with Jesse first and then hang up his gun. "So what's the plan now that we're here, boss?" Burton asked tentatively. "We can't just hang around looking down at the town for weeks." "Yeah, we need more supplies," Frank chimed in. "If you hadn't killed the leader of the Stockton gang for that gold, we could have been living an easy life by now." Burton shook his head and sighed as he coaxed the fire back into life. If only. Before he could utter another word, Bill had planted his boot firmly on Burton's back, sending him sprawling into the dirt. He whipped his knife out and held it against his cousin's neck, enjoying the way his eyes bulged with fear. "If only what, Burton? If only I'd kept my temper? If only I'd left the gold for Stockton and his men to squander." No, I didn't mean that," Burton stuttered. "If only Levi Ware wasn't hunting us, is all." Bill pressed the knife's blade on Burton's neck for a moment longer, then stood up and nonchalantly sheathed it again. He couldn't afford to let his temper get the better of him. Not yet. Levi Ware probably thinks we're still in Montana. That's the last sighting he had of us. And even if he has tracked us here, he's one man against the three of us. We can deal with him, no problem. "Uh-huh. He's nothing to worry about," Frank said, cracking his knuckles. Burton staggered back to his feet and hooked the blackened pan over the top of the fire, taking care not to catch Bill's eye. "We'll head into town for supplies in the next few days," Bill said, coming to a decision. "It will give me a chance to make contact with that crooked lawyer I was recommended. Mr. Green. I hear he can set us up with new names and documents for the right price. And just like that, we'll be able to start a new life," Burton said. Bill pulled the bottle of good whiskey, which he kept for himself, out of his saddlebag and took a swig. The liquor forged a fiery path down his throat and restored his good humor. "And we'll be able to start spending the money from the gold," he said, chuckling. The look on Abe Stockton's face when he realized I had his gold, just before I killed him, it was priceless. Frank chuckled at the memory. "I'm going to enjoy spending every dollar, even more, because we didn't have to do anything other than steal it. I'm going to get myself a nice house and a woman on my arm." Bill took another swig of whiskey and sauntered back to the rocky outcrop to look down at Rocky River Town again. "It will be a whole new start, and all those lawmen will be left wondering how Bill Whitley and his gang got away with it," he murmured with a dry chuckle. Chapter 5. Jesse took a long gulp of coffee and leaned back in his chair with a satisfied sigh. He had just finished a hearty portion of his ma's apple pie, topped with cream from their milking cow, and felt as full as a tick. It's a good thing I'm busy with work, or I'd be needing larger trousers with all this good food you cook for me, Ma. Elena gave him an indulgent smile. A man can't work on an empty stomach, son. No fear of that with you in the kitchen, Ma. He stretched his arms and gave her a surreptitious glance as she stacked their two dishes. She had a bit of color in her cheeks, which was a relief, but her breath still sounded wheezy in her chest if she exerted herself. "How's work going?" she asked casually. "It's going well. The fences are all mended, and I reckon we'll get at least 5 new calves born soon. Also, there are 2 new ranchers out near Hudsonville who want me to mill their grain this summer." Elena gave him a nod. "Sounds like you have the business side of things all taken care of." She lifted one eyebrow a touch and looked at him. "Any other news?" "The weather's looking fair for sowing the wheat." Jesse poured himself another cup of coffee and took a long gulp of it, wondering if that was all she meant. "Did you have a chance to speak with Mrs. Devereaux?" she asked after a beat. "The Briscoe brothers' brides are settling in well, I heard. It seems they've taken to Rocky River and ranch life." "Uh-huh," Jesse said. "That's a miracle, seeing as they're always falling out." He decided he should come clean, because even though Mrs. Devereaux was discreet, he'd bet his last dollar somebody had probably spotted him going into her office, which meant word would get around town anyway. It was hard to keep secrets in Rocky River, although he had managed to hide his past involvement with the Whitley gang and needed to keep it that way. "I know you don't want me to push you into anything, son. Heaven forbid. And you're a grown man with a free will." Elena stood up and carried the dirty dishes to the side, but then returned to the table and rested her hand on Jesse's shoulder. "But who's going to cook your favorite apple pie and cream after I'm gone?" Jesse's eyes danced with amusement. "Are you bribing me, Ma? That's half the problem. Having someone like you taking care of me all these years has spoiled me for marriage. Nobody could ever live up to you, and whoever tried would be hard-pressed to even be half as good as you. It's a mighty shame," he added with a rueful sigh. "Oh, Jesse, don't say that." Elena's voice was half scolding, but tears suddenly glistened in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Ma. I didn't mean to upset you." Jesse jumped up and folded her into a bear hug. Her shoulders felt bony in his arms, as though a sharp wind could blow her away. "Sit down and let me get you a cup of coffee in your favorite cup." Elena nodded and sat back in her chair, dabbing the corner of her apron at her eyes. "I raised you as best I could, and it wasn't always easy after losing your pa and wondering if Bill Whitley would ever catch up with us. Please forgive me, Ma. What I said was unkind, and I'd never want to hurt your feelings. I guess I'm just a bit prickly when it comes to matters of the heart." He poured coffee into a dainty bone china cup and handed it to her on the matching saucer. Usually she saved it for special occasions, but he wanted to treat her to make up for his thoughtless comment. "It would mean so much to know you have someone to take care of you, is all," Elena said quietly. She took a sip of her coffee and eyed him over the cup. "It's all a mother ever wants for a son, you know." Jessie sighed and sat down next to her, covering her hand with his. "I kept my promise, Ma." He squeezed her hand, feeling guilty for giving her hope when he still felt so conflicted. "I went to Mrs. Devereaux and asked her to place an advertisement for me." "For real?" Elena's eyes lit up. "An advertisement in the Matrimonial Times for a mail-order bride?" "No, Ma. An advertisement for a sack of potatoes." Jesse grinned again and shook his head. "Of course, for a young lady. One of those from the East looking for adventure out West." "Oh, Jesse, you don't know how happy this makes me." Elena clasped her hands to her chest and sighed happily. "I must get the spare room ready, and maybe the bed needs a new patchwork quilt. I'll buy some fabric from the mercantile because I want it to look just right." "Ma, steady on. Don't get your hopes up," Jesse admonished, holding his hands up to slow her down. "Just because it worked for the Briscoe brothers doesn't mean it will work for me." He stood up and carried the rest of the dishes to the side for her. "I told Mrs. Devereaux I don't want children," he muttered. "That's the compromise, Ma. because after thinking I could save Angeline and Lily from Bill Whitley and failing, I ain't going through that again. It's better just not to have children." Elena's face fell for a moment, but then her smile returned. "That's okay. I'm sure Mrs. Devereaux will know how to word the advertisement perfectly, so exactly the right sort of woman replies." Jessie could see that she was determined to get him married off before the year was out, and nothing was going to dim her enthusiasm. "I'm going back outside to chop some wood for the fire. Will you be all right?" Jessie reached for his hat again, feeling the need to be alone with his thoughts, as he did every now and again. He was so used to being single that he didn't fear being in his own company like so many folks did. He wondered, yet again, if he was cut out for marriage. There was so much that could go wrong, especially writing to a woman he had never even met. "Don't worry about me," Elena said. Her eyes twinkled, and she already looked better than she had for months. "I know you said you don't want children, Jessie, but who knows what the Lord's plan is for you? Only He does." She stood up and straightened her shoulders in a way that Jessie recognized that she had something important to say. "I'll see you later then," he muttered, hastily heading toward the door. "I've prayed about this for so long, son. I know you'll find the perfect wife with God's help and Mrs. Devereaux's," she added. What happened to Angeline and baby Lily was the result of Bill Whitley's cruelty. If he'd been a decent man, they never would have needed to escape, and you did what you could for them. "It wasn't enough, though," Jessie muttered. "It's time to forgive yourself, son," Elena continued. "I never told you how proud I was of you for trying to help Angeline and her baby. Your pa and I raised you to put others first, but I want you to put yourself first this time. I pray that the Lord will provide for you, just the way you deserve, and bring you happiness and a woman to love." Jessie mulled over his ma's words as he picked up the axe a few minutes later and started splitting logs. "Get what I deserve? That's what's worrying me." The thought pulsed through his mind in time with each scything swing of his arm. Jessie felt a squirm of guilt in his belly and chopped even faster, trying to banish the feeling, but it was no good. He dropped the axe again and walked over to the fence to watch his animals grazing as the sun started to dip toward the horizon and the evening shadows lengthened. He had raised Elena's hopes that he was going to marry, but the truth was, he had regretted placing the advertisement from the moment he had walked out of Mrs. Devereaux's office. "What sort of woman deserves to be married to a man like me?" he muttered, leaning on the top rail. He wasn't fit to become a husband, not with his checkered past. Even though he had tentatively started putting down roots in Rocky River, there were still nights when every creak of the log cabin had him leaping out of bed and reaching for his gun, wondering if the Whitley gang had found him again. He knew deep in his heart that Bill Whitley would never stop looking for him. Bill blamed Jessie for losing Angeline and Lily, and one day he would want revenge. Killing his pa John was not enough. Bill would not rest until he was dead too. Of that he was certain. He wandered back to the chopping block and picked his axe up again, feeling the weight of it in his hands. "I fell in with bad men and committed crimes when I was with the gang," he muttered to himself. "No woman deserves a husband with that sort of past." He swung the axe high over his shoulder, and it fell with a satisfying thump, splitting a thick log clean in half. After a pause, a tight smile crossed Jessie's face, and he nodded slightly to himself. From what he knew of the young ladies who traveled west looking for a happy marriage, they wanted children. He had seen the new babies proudly presented as the ladies, and their friends cooed over them on shopping trips into town. He was certain no sensible woman would even bother to reply to his advertisement now that he had stipulated he didn't want children. He lifted the axe and swung it again and again. By the time the mound of split logs was enough for a week's worth of firewood, he had managed to convince himself that remaining unmarried was for the best. The spark of longing to come home to a wife's loving embrace each evening was extinguished, and if he ever felt lonesome, it was a small price to pay. If, by some crazy chance, a woman did reply to his advertisement, he would firmly explain that his needs had changed. He would hire a housekeeper instead. A woman who was happy to keep house and learn the ropes from his ma, but who wanted nothing more. a woman who he could keep safe by not falling in love with her. It was the perfect solution. Elena would rest easy, knowing that someone was taking over her role of keeping him well fed and even providing a bit of company, even if it was only as a housekeeper instead of a wife. And he could quit worrying about repeating his mistakes of the past. Chapter 6. Faye wasn't sure who was more grateful to step out of the stagecoach wagon at the center of Rocky River town, her or baby Rose. "Sorry, it was a bit rough," the stage driver said with a rueful smile. "You sure do have the magic touch with that little girl of yours. I've had some journeys from Hudsonville where babies have cried all the way, but yours has been angelic." "Oh, she's not." Faye bit her lip. She had been about to correct the driver that Rose was not her baby, except the words wouldn't come. She realized she had already given her heart to the cherub who was lying placidly in her arms, blinking slowly at the brightness of the sunshine after the dim interior of the stagecoach. "Not yours?" The driver leaned closer and winked. "The conductor on the train told me what happened. If you ask me, I've never seen a baby look more like she belongs to exactly the right person than both of you, ma'am. God bless you, and I hope you have a happy new life here in Rocky River. Your new husband will be a lucky fellow indeed to call you his family." Faye blushed at his kind words. "Thank you, I hope so. Here's your bag. I'm taking the horses to be fed and rested before the next part of my journey. Is your fiancé meeting you here?" The driver looked up and down the street, seeing only women and children bustling about their chores. He was well used to dropping off mail-order brides at their destination, except usually there would be an anxious-looking gentleman waiting for the coach to pull up. "He'll be coming sometime soon," Faye mumbled. She didn't want to admit that she had traveled on a whim. There had been plenty of ladies on the train, eagerly poring over the letters they had exchanged with their husbands-to-be before setting out to meet them, and she was starting to feel foolish for acting so hastily. Except if I hadn't, I would never have met Jillian, and she wouldn't have left Rose to me. The thought gave her courage. "Well, goodbye, and I hope you'll be here soon." The driver jumped nimbly back onto his seat, and the horses trotted smartly off, knowing exactly where to go. Faye swapped Rose into her other arm and picked her carpet bag up. The mercantile store was closest to where she had been dropped off, and she decided that would be as good a place as any to ask for directions. She lifted her chin and pushed the door open, hoping the worry that had suddenly caught up with her wasn't written all over her face. She needed to be confident if she was going to pull this off. "I'm not the same timid girl who left Boston," she told herself. "I have Rose to look after now, and I'll do whatever it takes to give her a better start in life than Jillian did." "Good afternoon, ma'am." The owner of the mercantile bustled toward her as the bell tinkled to announce her arrival. "Can I help you?" "Ethel and Elmer Duffy and your service," a wiry man said with a small bow in her direction. "We're the proprietors of the mercantile, and you are?" "Faye Clarke, and this is Rose." "What a darling little baby," Ethel said, peeking over Faye's arm to cluck over Rose. "Look at those adorable blue eyes and blonde curls, Elmer." She smiled up at Faye. "Why don't you pass her to me while you browse?" "All the babies in town find their way into Ethel's arms sooner or later," Elmer said with a chuckle. "Go on. You look like you could use a rest for a few minutes after being on the stagecoach." Faye placed Rose into Ethel's waiting arms, thinking no harm could come of it. She looked around the store, finding it quaintly old-fashioned after Boston. There were tall shelves stacked from floor to ceiling with all manner of goods and long ladders which could slide along the shelves for Elmer to reach what he needed. "A piece of ribbon for your hair would look nice," Ethel said. She nodded toward the ribbon display as she rocked Rose, making the baby giggle. "Blue would suit you and match your eyes." Faye wondered whether she had enough money. Her hair was pinned in a tight bun, but a small piece of ribbon to tie around it was tempting, and she was feeling rather disheveled from the long journey. "This is the last piece on this bobbin," Ethel said. She held it up next to Faye and smiled. "It's the perfect color. You can have it for nothing." "Oh, I couldn't possibly." Ethel pressed it into her hand. "Just make sure you bring Rose back in another day. She's delightful, and I always enjoy getting to know new folks in town." She gestured to a mirror in the corner. "Why don't you tie it in your hair now, dear?" "She really does like to get to know folks," Elmer chimed in, giving his wife a fond look. He peered behind the polished wood counter and frowned. "Has Jesse Rogers delivered more flour yet, Ethel? I'll be running low if he doesn't come soon." "He'll be in today, I'm sure," Ethel replied placidly. Since when had he ever let us down? His mill would soon go out of business if he didn't keep his customers supplied, and you know his flour is the best in the district. Faye's hands trembled slightly as she realized they must be talking about the man she had come here to meet. Her mouth went dry at the thought that he might turn up at the mercantile before she'd even had a chance to get to the matrimonial bureau. "You're quite right, dear. I'm fussing about nothing." Elmer started weighing out the flour that he still had. "He's a good man. Jesse is," he said conversationally. "Takes good care of his mother, which is more than can be said about some folks." "I'll just buy this handkerchief, please," Faye said, hastily picking up a square of lawn cotton with an embroidered flower in the corner. She couldn't really spare the money, but they had been so welcoming, she felt she had to purchase something. Of course. Elmer licked the stub of pencil and wrote it in his ledger before taking the money she passed over the counter. "So, where are you staying?" Ethel asked. "The Rosebush Inn? Or perhaps Mistletoe Lodge? That's where most of the mail-order brides stay for their first few days if they're not meeting someone off the stagecoach." "I need to go to Mrs. Devereaux's first," Faye said, avoiding the question. "Could you tell me where I can find her office, please?" "Just down the street. You'll see the fancy writing over the door." Ethel gave Rose one last rock and then gave her back to Faye. "Mind you, come and visit us again, Faye." "I will, and thank you." Faye scurried away before any more questions came her way. She could tell the couple were wondering who she had traveled out to meet, but were too polite to ask outright. As Faye walked through town following their directions, she was beset with doubts again. Out of all the advertisements she had read, this was the only one that had caught her eye because of the clearly stated request for no children. Although the doctor's words about her not being able to bear children had been a bitter pill to swallow, and she had prayed they might prove to be wrong, Jesse Rogers' plain speaking had touched her. He was clearly a man who knew himself well enough to be honest. "I took the risk of coming without replying with a letter," she murmured to herself. "I couldn't have married Stanley," she reminded herself firmly under her breath. "It would have been doomed and more than I could bear, with his womanizing ways and complete lack of kindness." Rose stirred in her arms, and Faye's heart lifted. Things had changed beyond her wildest dreams over the last 2 weeks, and although it wasn't what she'd planned, she realized they had changed for the better. A woman in an extravagantly ruffled gown and tightly coiffed ringlets suddenly came briskly around the corner of a side street and smiled at Faye before hurrying ahead of her. She paused in front of a brightly colored door and unlocked it. Faye glanced at the swirled lettering over the door and realized with a start that it was the town's matrimonial agency. The woman's head popped out of the door again. "Are you looking for me? I'm Mrs. Devereaux." "Yes, I'm here in response to one of your advertisements." Mrs. Devereaux looked perplexed. "Was I expecting you, dear? I don't recall anything about a young woman with a baby arriving in Rocky River today, and usually my record-keeping is exemplary." Faye felt all her previous determination shrivel under the woman's concerned stare. This wasn't the warm welcome she had imagined, but then she couldn't really blame her. The advertisement had said to reply by letter. Instead, she had jumped on the first train heading out of Boston, recklessly hoping things would work out, only to find herself hundreds of miles from home, surrounded by strangers. "What a fool I've been," she thought, chastising herself for being so hot-headed. Her ma would surely not have condoned such irresponsible behavior, blindly putting her future in the hands of a man she had never even met, and somehow hoping that everything would end happily. Mrs. Devereaux gave a discreet cough and opened the door wider, beckoning her inside. "Why don't you explain who you are, and we can go from there?" Her tone was a little more friendly this time, which gave Faye a sliver of reassurance. "Sit down, my dear. I expect you must be tired if you've only just arrived. Most ladies are. Faye perched on the edge of the seat and took a deep breath. You're right. I just arrived today on the stagecoach. My name is Faye Clarke, and I've traveled all the way from Boston. And which gentleman is it you've been writing to? Mrs. Devereaux opened her ledger and ran her finger down the entries. I don't see your name here, she muttered to herself. She gave a tinkling laugh. I do apologize, dear. You must think I'm very disorganized. It's not like me at all, but perhaps it slipped my mind. Actually, it's not you who's at fault, Faye said awkwardly. She fumbled in her pocket and pulled out the now crumpled advertisement that she had torn from the newspaper, passing it across the desk. Let me see. Mrs. Devereaux perched some glasses on her nose and looked at it. Jesse Rogers, the man with the mill in Rocky River, Faye said hesitantly. Why, yes, of course. I placed this advertisement very recently. Mrs. Devereaux still looked puzzled as she looked up from the scrap of paper. I could swear I haven't received a letter from anyone called Faye. In fact, I haven't received any replies at all. She took the glasses off again and rubbed the bridge of her nose. I was doubtful about how many replies we would have in this instance because of Mr. Rogers' very specific request to state that he didn't want children. Don't ask me why. A nice gentleman like him would make a lovely pa, but who am I to argue? She threw her hands up and looked more closely at Rose, who was starting to fidget in Faye's arms. I didn't have time to reply by letter, Faye replied. She hitched Rose higher and rocked her gently. I figured I could just present myself to you and go from there. But did you read the advertisement, dear? Mrs. Devereaux sounded flustered and wondered whether she was losing her grip on reality. She prided herself on making perfect matches between her gentleman clients and the eager young ladies traveling west to marry. But clearly, something had gone very wrong. I did, Faye said simply. And when I left Boston, I fitted Mr. Rogers' request. A bride looking for a clean start and understanding there would be no children. Then, what happened? You have a baby. Mrs. Devereaux jumped up and scurried toward her bureau to rifle through her paperwork. I'm sure I didn't make a mistake when I took Mr. Rogers' instructions down. Rose was abandoned. Actually, that's not quite correct. She was left in my care with her mother's blessing. I have the note to prove it. Faye reached toward her carpetbag, but Mrs. Devereaux waved her hands to indicate it wasn't necessary. All I can suggest is that you give me a chance to break the news to Mr. Rogers, she said, scurrying back around her desk again. She gave Faye an appraising look. You're certainly pretty enough, and I reckon by the look of your hands you're not afraid of hard work. She tapped a finger on the desk, deep in thought. It could work. The baby, are you set on keeping her? There's an orphanage in Hudsonville. Faye gasped and clutched Rose tightly to her chest. At the suggestion that she might give Rose away to be adopted, a surge of protectiveness ran through her veins. She stood up and shook her head. Just as she was about to speak, the sound of a man's voice came through the door. I won't be long, Ma. You go ahead to the mercantile, and I'll catch you up. It's Jesse Rogers, Mrs. Devereaux gasped. The door flew open, and Faye found herself staring up at a broad-shouldered man silhouetted in the doorway. Did you say my name? The voice was deep and warm. Faye shook her head, unable to speak. Yes, this is Miss Faye Clarke. She's here in response to your advertisement, Mrs. Devereaux stuttered. Her usual calm and collected demeanor had completely deserted her. The man stepped closer. That can't be right. I haven't received a letter, and... His words stopped dead as his gaze fell on Rose's downy blonde curls as she lay cradled in Faye's arms. Chapter 7. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning as Jesse guided the wagon along the dusty road toward Rocky River Town Center. Spring had well and truly arrived, and Elena turned her face to the sun with a contented smile, which gave Jesse a sense of satisfaction. As far as he was concerned, ordinary was a good state of affairs because it meant that he had been blessed with another day without his past catching up with him. He hoped he would be able to forget all about Bill Whitley altogether someday, but perhaps not yet. How many people are you delivering flour to today? Elena asked. Just Elmer at the mercantile for now, Jesse replied. I'll do the rest next week, but I figured he might be running short. He's one of my best customers, and I don't want to let him down. Jesse always liked to deliver his flour after it had been freshly milled so that there was no chance of getting weevils in it. He had been up since before dawn to meet Elmer's order, even though it was a busy time of year getting the land ready to plant this year's wheat. "I don't have many chores to do in town today," Elena said. She darted her son an inquisitive look, wondering whether he might call in at the marriage bureau to see if he had received a letter back from his advertisement yet. Jesse felt the weight of her stare, but chose to ignore it. He hadn't summoned enough courage yet to tell his ma that he had changed his mind and decided to hire a housekeeper instead of getting married. He would cross that bridge when they came to it, he told himself. He clicked his tongue, and Robin trotted faster in front of the wagon. The sun was high in the sky, and he hoped he would be able to get the chores done quickly in town and return to his jobs on the ranch without losing too much of the day. "Howdy, Mrs. Rogers, and you, Jesse?" Several people called a greeting, like old friends. The town was bustling as they rumbled along the main street, and Jesse realized he had gotten attached to Rocky River and Wyoming more than anywhere else he had traveled through over his years running from the Whitley gang. In fact, there was no place else he would rather be. Once the horse was hitched, Jesse offered Elena the crook of his arm. She had been in fine spirits ever since he had told her about placing the advertisement and walked determinedly next to him without her cane that she sometimes used at home. He felt another wave of guilt, knowing that he would disappoint her in the near future when he explained his change of heart about getting married. "I know you told me not to make a fuss, but I've decided I would like to get some scraps of fabric from the mercantile while we're here." Elena smiled up at him, not waiting for his answer. "I think a new patchwork quilt is a nice way to mark a new beginning. It's not every day a young lady comes to share our life at the ranch and be part of our family." "I figured you might say that. Are you sure it won't be too much work? I don't want you overdoing things." Elena huffed with an amused look on her face. "A bit of needlework is the least I can do. If I start now, I should have it made by the time she arrives in a couple of months." Jesse patted her hand and nodded. He knew that once his ma had gotten an idea into her head, there was no stopping her. In that case, it's a grand idea. He felt a wave of affection for his ma. She was kind-hearted and always thinking of others, and he didn't want to spoil her day. He figured even if someone came just as a housekeeper, she would still appreciate a new quilt on her bed, and Elena would get pleasure from making it. "Look where we are," Elena said. Jesse looked up and realized they were outside Mrs. Devereaux's office. "Seeing as we're here, you may as well ask Mrs. Devereaux if you've had any replies yet." Elena's expression was a mixture of hope and excitement. "Surely it's too soon?" He glanced through the window and saw Mrs. Devereaux speaking with a young woman, but Elena was already reaching for the door. "I won't be long, Ma. You go ahead to the mercantile, and I'll catch you up," he said hastily. "If you think that's for the best?" He leaned past his ma and pushed the door open, knowing that he would get no peace until he'd at least inquired. But his way was blocked by the young woman who had turned to face him. She had lustrous dark hair and eyes which were the brightest blue he had ever seen. He felt his breath hitch in his chest as she blinked up at him. "This is Miss Faye Clarke. She's here in response to your advertisement." Mrs. Devereaux's voice sounded far away. Jesse shook his head, thinking he had misheard because something was very wrong. This charming young woman standing before him was holding a baby in her arms, and he leaned closer to make sure the baby had downy blonde curls, just like Lily had all those years ago. "This can't be right. I only recently placed the advertisement." Confusion fogged his mind. "Well, yes, I know that." Mrs. Devereaux bustled forward, sounding more certain of herself. "And I do declare it's a miracle. Miss Clarke was so taken with your advertisement that she booked a ticket and caught the first train out west, Mr. Rogers." But, Jesse was lost for words as he looked at Faye. She was a head shorter than him, with a creamy complexion and a slim, graceful figure. Her gown was deep blue, which only served to make her eyes look even bluer. They reminded him of the clear pools of water in the river on a summer's day when the sky was reflected in them. "My name is Faye Clarke. There was a hint of defiance in her tone as she extended her hand. Mrs. Devereaux is correct. I traveled from Boston after seeing your advertisement instead of waiting to write to you. You traveled all this way to be a mail-order bride without sending a letter first? Jessie didn't know whether to be shocked or full of admiration for her leap of faith that they would hit it off. I guess that's about right. Her voice was soft but confident. He noticed that her hand trembled slightly, though, as he shook it. His mind was whirling with a dozen questions which he kept to himself. Like, why didn't you write to me first? Like Mrs. Devereaux said would happen. How did you know you might like me? Why are you holding a baby? What will you say when I tell you I'm hiring a housekeeper instead of looking for a wife? I expect you might be wondering about baby Rose, Mrs. Devereaux said, looking somewhat guilty. There's a perfectly good explanation, and I can assure you I wrote exactly what you asked when I placed your advertisement. Jessie opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Rose was left to me by her mother on the train. Faye lifted her chin and met him with her clear, blue-eyed gaze, which was unapologetic. Jillian, her ma, bore her out of wedlock and didn't really want her. Oh? Jessie croaked. He risked another glance at the baby and felt as though all the breath had been sucked from his lungs. She reminded him so much of Lily. I know you stated very clearly that you didn't want children in your mail-order bride advertisement, but I can't just abandon Rose, and I won't entertain the idea of having her adopted. Her tone was firm, but her expression softened every time she looked down at Rose. I'll understand if you don't want to have anything to do with us, she added. Well, as it happens, I'd already changed my mind. Jessie shuffled his feet awkwardly. I figured I needed a housekeeper to help Ma out, but it was too late to say anything, as Mrs. Devereaux already would have placed the advertisement. I'm afraid you've had a wasted journey. A sudden commotion behind Jessie interrupted them, and his mother slipped into the room. Miss Clarke, we are delighted to make your acquaintance. I'm Elena, Jessie's ma, and I couldn't help overhearing everything. It seems there's been a bit of a misunderstanding on all sides, but I'm sure it's nothing that can't be figured out for the best. Well, yes, you're quite right, Elena, Mrs. Devereaux said hastily. She was relieved that the straight-talking old lady was taking charge of this situation, which was becoming more confusing by the minute. Abandoned babies, clients not meaning what they said, it was all too much. I expect you and Rose must be exhausted, my dear. Elena pulled back the edge of the shawl and beamed at the sight of the baby. Jessie noticed that Faye did suddenly look rather pale, and he reached out to steady her as she swayed. Jessie will help you to our wagon, and you must come home with us and have a good night's sleep and a hot meal. Not to mention, I expect Rose needs feeding as well. Jessie finally found his voice again, remembering his manners. Take my arm, Miss Clarke. The wagon's just up the street. He scooped up her carpet bag in his spare hand. Faye gave him a grateful smile and nodded after a moment's hesitation. That's very kind, thank you. I think all the excitement of the journey just caught up with me. You'll find our homestead is the perfect place to get over it, Elena said happily. She bustled out onto the street ahead of them and then turned to smile at Faye. Jessie couldn't remember the last time he had seen his mother look so happy and didn't have the heart to remind them both that he was only looking for a housekeeper. Nothing more. I guess a few days with us won't harm, he thought inwardly. He looked up and down the street before setting off for the wagon, as was his unconscious habit to always check that there was no sign of the Whitley gang. Faye would no doubt use Mrs. Devereaux's services to find herself a husband and would be snapped up in no time. Jessie suppressed a sigh. She wouldn't want to settle for second best as their housekeeper if she had traveled out to get married. It was just a shame that it couldn't be with him. Faye Clarke was the only woman who had caught his interest for as long as he could remember. But she had a baby, so it wasn't to be. Chapter 8. Faye's first 2 weeks on Greendale Ranch were beyond what she could have imagined for herself. Of course, she had expected life to be different. That was why she had left Boston and the odious Stanley Trent behind, after all. But she found herself almost in disbelief at how much her life had changed, and it was hard to credit that until a few short weeks ago she had never lived anywhere other than Boston. She had grown up surrounded by the frenetic growth of a booming city and the hustle and bustle of people hurrying through the streets and the constant sound of wagons rumbling past. By contrast, her first impression of Greendale Ranch was one of peace and calm. Even though she realized that spring was a busy season for anyone connected to the land, it still felt wonderfully tranquil. The background noise to her day was now birdsong and the lowing of cattle. When the wind blew, she could hear it rustling in the unfurling green leaves in the trees, instead of the constant clatter of warehouses and industry that she had left behind. Even the sound of the steam engine used to run the mill machines couldn't dim her delight with where she now lived, as it rarely lasted for more than an hour at a time. Much to her surprise, she had been able to leave the bustling city behind and exchange it for the rolling hills and mountains of Rocky River and Wyoming as easily as a snake shedding its skin. Morning times were Faye's favorite part of the day. Out of long habit from working at the bakery, she woke before dawn. She would give thanks to the Lord for her blessings as she stretched under the faded quilt, then open the drapes of her bedroom to watch the inky starlit sky slowly fade into gray and then start to lighten with streaks of pink and yellow in the east with the sunrise. It never failed to fill her with joy, especially as it was her moment of quiet contemplation with Rose lying, still sleepy, in her arms. It's almost perfect, she thought every morning. The only thing which caused a hint of discontent was not knowing why Jesse had changed his mind about wanting to marry. Even though she understood and accepted that it couldn't be to her, it still puzzled her. Faye yawned and hurried through to the kitchen. After feeding Rose, her first task of the day was to riddle the fire in the hearth and add fresh wood, and then get the range going for the day. It never really went out, but there was an art to getting it hot enough to boil water to make the first pot of coffee for the day, which she quickly mastered. Her time doing all the chores for Isaac and Nora had stood her in good stead, she now realized. "You should have woken me," Elena said, bustling in after her. "There's no need. I'm just getting ahead of the day," Faye replied. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the room. "You should let me get on with the chores and rest a little longer." "That's a kind offer, dear." Elena peeked into the crib where Rose was happily lying, watching the way the drapes shifted in the slight breeze through the open window. "Jesse means well hiring you as a housekeeper, but what he doesn't realize is that keeping house is what shapes my day. I've never been one to sit and do nothing." Faye nodded in agreement. "Me neither. I like to keep busy." The two women shared a look of understanding. Faye found Elena's company a real pleasure. At first, she had felt nervous, taking on the tasks which, clearly, Elena had done all her life. But the old lady had a knack for showing Faye how she liked things to be done around the house without ever making her feel awkward or as though she should have known everything already. After years of Isaac and Nora being so critical of everything she did, it was a refreshing change. Within her first 2 weeks, Faye had taken on the cleaning and sewing, and lastly, Elena had gradually encouraged her to do more cooking. "Rose is such a delightful baby," Elena commented, as she did almost every day. She angled the crib toward the window slightly, and Rose kicked her legs with excitement as her view changed. Faye nodded in agreement, knowing that she was probably biased. "I wonder what Jillian's doing now? Does she miss Rose?" She couldn't comprehend turning her back on a baby, but also, she wouldn't judge Gillian for what she had done. It was not up to her, and if anything, what she felt for the woman was compassion. She was sure that Jillian would never forget Rose, especially as she had hinted at having to leave a bad situation behind to travel west, much like Faye. "She certainly seems very placid compared to some of the babies my acquaintances at church had," Faye replied. "I think the fresh air agrees with her. She likes being with me when I'm in the garden." Elena sighed wistfully. "I always hoped for a girl, but the Lord blessed us with Jesse, so I'm not complaining. It's wonderful to have a baby here, though. It's the best thing that's happened to us in a long time." She lowered her voice as Jesse's shadow appeared in the doorway. "Would you like bacon and eggs this morning?" Faye asked him. "Uh-huh, that sounds good." His reply was perfunctory, and he picked up an old newspaper from the sideboard, rustling the pages loudly as he opened it, and soon became absorbed in the contents. Coming right up. Faye wasn't sure if she was imagining it or whether he was using the pages as some sort of shield to block his view between him and Rose. She had noticed that he rarely looked toward the crib, unlike Elena, whose gaze often turned toward Rose, accompanied by a soft smile. "I figured you've been working so hard you might appreciate a bit extra," Faye said a moment later as she slid the plate in front of him. There were 3 thick rashers of bacon and 2 eggs on it, with a slice of bread on the side. Elena's eyes twinkled with amusement. "What were you saying about me giving you too much good food, son? I reckon Faye's cut from the same cloth in believing a man can't work on an empty stomach." Jesse's mouth twitched with the beginning of a smile, and he bobbed his head in thanks. "Maybe, but nobody can beat your apple pie, Ma." Faye smiled to herself as she turned back to the range to add 2 more eggs to the pan. She had been wondering what to bake that would appeal to Jesse, and now she knew, as long as Elena wouldn't mind. "What do you have planned for today, Jesse?" Elena asked casually. "I need to mill more grain, and then I think I'll move the cattle into another paddock. They've grazed where they are pretty tight, and I don't want them breaking out looking for fresh grass." "I reckon you could probably use Faye's help with that, son, don't you?" Elena coughed, sounding wheezy as she suggested it. "It's not easy moving stock on your own," she added to explain herself to Faye. "Of course, I'd like to help." Faye hoped she would be up to the task. So far, she had only been doing jobs in the log cabin and garden, but on a lovely spring day, the lure of being outside was tempting. "I'm not sure about that, Ma. You know it doesn't take much to spook the animals. They're not used to new folks being around them." Elena coughed again. "Don't be silly, son. Faye might as well learn how to help with the animals now that she's here. Besides, I'm sure you're underestimating what she's capable of." Jesse harumphed and gave Faye a look that was hard to read. Not so much reluctant as perplexed, as though he couldn't quite figure out where she fitted in his and Elena's well-established routines. "I guess so. I'll see you outside after I've finished milling the grain," he said eventually. He pushed the plate away and stood up. "Thank you for breakfast. I like the way you cook the bacon." "I'll be sure to listen for when the mill stops," Faye replied. She whisked the dirty dishes away and then handed him his jacket. "You should be all right to keep things in that pocket now," she added. She had spotted the torn pocket when he'd hung it up the previous evening and mended it after he'd gone to bed with small, neat stitches, which were barely visible. "Thank you. I'd kept forgetting to tell Ma it was split, but you didn't need to do it. I reckon you wouldn't want to lose anything, and I'm here to work. Don't forget." Faye replied. She saw the hint of another smile, his green eyes crinkling at the corners, which made her wish he would smile more often. As she washed the dishes and started peeling potatoes for stew, Faye's thoughts kept turning back to Jesse and his reluctance to look at Rose. It was a strange reaction, but so far, Elena had failed to reveal where it came from. Perhaps he doesn't like children? Faye pushed the idea away. He seemed normal enough, and most men wanted a family of their own, especially with a ranch and milling business to hand on to the next generation. Maybe he's angry and feels I deceived him and came here under false pretenses. This thought made her stop what she was doing. It seemed like the most likely explanation, but it wasn't right to take it out on Rose. If Jesse was going to ignore anyone, it should be Faye, not a baby who was innocent in all this. Either way, she resolved that she would talk to him about it when the right moment came. A couple of hours later, Faye stepped out onto the veranda and tightened a shawl over her shoulders before walking purposefully toward the milling barn. "Just remember to take your time. Animals respond best when you don't rush them," Elena called after her. She had assured Faye that she would enjoy having Rose all to herself for however long Jesse needed Faye's help. "See you later." Faye turned back and saw that Rose was already giggling as Elena bounced her on her lap. She was sitting on one of the rocking chairs on the veranda, and the sun glinted off Rose's soft curls. Elena lifted Rose's arm and gave a wave with her tiny hand, which almost brought tears of happiness to Faye's eyes. The interior of the milling barn was cool and dark as she let herself in. She sniffed appreciatively, and the scent of freshly ground wheat took her back to her time in the bakery in an instant. There was a full sack nearby, and Faye strolled over to it, running her fingers through the silky flour. "What do you think of it?" Jesse's question, as he suddenly appeared from the shadows, made her jump. "Ma mentioned you used to work in a bakery," he added gruffly. "It looks better than some of the flour we were given," she replied. "More importantly, it smells fresh. I could always tell how good my cakes and rolls would rise by the smell of the flour. The unscrupulous merchants used to try and bulk it up with chalk, even dust sometimes." Jesse shook his head. "Why would they do that? Surely you'd never buy from them again." "I don't suppose they cared as long as they made easy money. Boston was so busy that there was always someone else to sell to." "Shall we move these animals then, Miss Clarke?" Jesse folded the top of the sack over and tied it shut with a piece of rope. "I'll be taking this flour into town for Elmer Duffy at the Mercantile tomorrow. Ma usually comes with me, but she said it would be easier if you could pick up her supplies instead, if you don't mind." "Of course not. I have a few things I want to get for Rose, so that would work well." Jesse strode ahead of her out into the sunshine, and she couldn't see his expression, but his shoulders tensed at the mention of Rose's name. "I'll grab you a stick to hold for when we're moving the cattle," he muttered, heading for the woodpile. It felt good to walk across the paddock next to Jesse, and Faye stole surreptitious glances at him now and again. His chiseled jawline and rugged outdoor complexion were very different from what she was used to seeing in Boston, but she felt drawn to him nonetheless. Under different circumstances, she had to admit to herself that she would fall in love with him, but she couldn't allow herself to entertain such an idea when he was dead set on only needing a housekeeper. And more importantly, she couldn't love someone who might resent Rose. "That green you can see over there is the early wheat starting to come up," Jesse said, pointing toward a long field in the distance. "I'll sow some more over yonder in the next few weeks," he added, nodding at the brown field next to it. "You work hard," Faye remarked. "Your ma must be very proud of everything you've achieved." "Proud? I don't know about that." He kicked a stone out of the way and thrust his hands in his pockets. "Are you happy with the help I've given Elena so far?" Faye walked faster to keep up with him, sounding slightly breathless. "Sure am," he said. She wondered whether he would enlarge on his comment, but it seemed Jesse was a man of few words. "We're moving that group of cattle over there, just up the hill to fresh pasture. Usually, I would do it on my horse, but seeing as you're new to this, it's probably better we just take it slowly on foot." "What do you want me to do?" Faye suddenly felt nervous, not wanting to disappoint him. He turned to look at her and then broke into a smile. "It's nothing complicated. Just stand in that gap and make sure they don't run through and escape." Faye did as he asked and was relieved that the cattle seemed to know exactly what was required of them. At first, they milled around in circles, looking reluctant to move, but Jesse yelled and hollered, cajoling them forward. Suddenly, the one at the front started thundering toward the open gateway, with the others following close behind, all except one. "Look out!" she cried. A horned steer had lowered its head and turned to face Jesse, pawing at the ground and looking for all the world as though it was going to charge him. "Get on, you old troublemaker!" Jesse shouted. He cracked his whip on the floor, and the lumbering steer turned and ran after the rest of the herd. "You make it look so easy, Mr. Rogers," Faye called as she watched Jesse run up the last part of the track to swing the gate shut behind the animals. His broad shoulders looked muscular under his shirt, and his forearms were already tanned where his shirt sleeves were rolled up. She felt herself blush as he turned and smiled broadly. It was the first time she had seen him look truly happy, compared to his usual guarded expression, and she felt a strange sensation in her chest, almost as though her heart had skipped a beat. "Only because I had your help," he replied, striding back toward her. He picked his jacket up and threw it over his shoulder. "I doubt that," Faye chuckled. "All I did was stand there and wave my stick in the air." Trust me, if you hadn't been there, that troublemaker steer would have been halfway to Rocky River by now, leading the others astray. His green eyes crinkled with amusement, making her heart skip another beat. Honestly, I've made more than my share of mistakes learning how to manage the herd. They fell into step together, walking back toward the homestead. Can I ask you a question? Faye said hesitantly. She had decided to seize the moment while he was in a good mood. Go ahead. Why did you change your mind about seeking a mail-order bride after you placed your advertisement? I mean, I know you said you didn't want children, which ruled me out, but I get the impression your ma is disappointed you don't want to marry. Jessie's eyebrows shot up in surprise, and Faye instantly regretted her question. She had spoiled the moment. I mean, you have all this. Faye gestured at the land around them. And I figure you're well regarded in town, Mr. Rogers. A fine gentleman like you should be married. Not to me, of course, but... Faye's words were cut off by Jessie's loud bark of laughter. I thought you were going to ask me about ranching, not matters of the heart. He lifted his hat and ran his hand through his tousled blonde hair, shaking his head. I like a woman who speaks her mind, he added with a grin. You remind me of Ma when she was younger. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry, Faye stuttered, wondering what had come over her. It's just, clearly, you wanted to find a wife when you asked Mrs. Devereaux to write the advertisement for you. She looked down at the ground for a moment. I know I don't have any right to ask, but do you know whether you might want me to stay as your housekeeper? She hadn't intended to be so blunt, but the words had slipped out anyway. It was purely because she was getting such different signals from Elena and Jessie that it was hard to know where her future lay. Elena seemed happy for her and Rose to stay, but Jessie could hardly bear to look at Rose, which was upsetting for her. Rose hasn't done anything wrong, she blurted out. But I can't stay here if you can't at least be pleasant to her. She's just a baby, and she doesn't deserve to be ignored. Without waiting for an answer, Faye picked up her skirts and ran, her eyes suddenly blurring with unexpected tears. Look out! Jessie's shout came too late as she stumbled through the scrubby grass and suddenly heard the ominous sound of rattling near her boots. A rattlesnake reared up in front of her, and she staggered backward, catching her foot on a rock and sprawling on the ground. A shot rang out, and a moment later, strong arms lifted her up. It's okay, I've got you. Jessie's voice was soft and full of concern. Did it bite me? Faye's words came out in a hoarse croak. What about Rose? I can't afford to get ill, Mr. Rogers. I shot the snake, and don't worry, it didn't get you. Jessie gently lowered her feet to the ground and held her until she had gathered her composure. Thank you. I guess I'm not ready to do any outside work after all. Jessie shrugged. I wouldn't say that. You're just getting used to our country ways. He offered her the crook of his arm. Let me help you back. You might be in shock for a few minutes. They walked in silence for a while, and Faye felt comforted by his solid presence next to her. I'm sorry I asked about, it's none of my business, she said as the log cabin came into view. Jessie paused and turned to face her. It's a perfectly reasonable question. He looked down at the ground as though he wasn't sure whether to continue. I haven't always been a rancher here, he continued, gesturing at the land around them. I've done things in the past I'm not proud of and made some enemies along the way. We all have a past, Mr. Rogers, Faye replied. Not like mine, he muttered. A shadow crossed his face. I can't risk getting married and having a family, not when there's still the slightest chance my past could catch up with me. But I want Ma to have help around the house. Faye didn't press him on his cryptic comment about his past. He would tell her in his own time, she figured. In that case, Mr. Rogers, I'd be very happy to stay as your housekeeper if you can accept that Rose is the baby I thought I might never be blessed with. So I love her unconditionally, and I certainly don't want her ever to feel like she's an inconvenience as she's growing up. That's as it should be, Jessie said gruffly. I thought you'd want to be off to find a husband at the first opportunity. I'm happy here at Greendale Ranch helping Elena, Mr. Rogers, Faye said simply. She looked up into his green eyes and smiled. It's Jessie, he replied. If you're going to stay and we're living under one roof, I think we can dispense with the formality of Mr. Rogers. And thank you for agreeing to stay. I've never seen Ma this happy. It's done her a world of good having you and Rose living here. Chapter 9. The Whitley gang was getting restless. After several weeks of lying low in the craggy woodland high above Rocky River, tempers were getting short and food was starting to run out, which was why Bill Whitley had come to the decision that it was time to act. "Can I trust you not to go wild?" he asked Frank and Burton. "Because if you're even thinking that way, it would be simpler for me to go alone." "Come on, Bill," Frank pleaded. "We're going out of our minds with boredom here. There's only so many times we can spy on the town from afar." "Don't you trust us?" Burton grumbled, rolling over and sitting up. "When have we ever let you down?" Bill eyed them both coolly and gave a curt nod. "All right, but I mean it. I don't want any trouble. We can stock up on supplies and maybe have a little bit of time in the saloon," Burton wheedled. He licked his lips, almost able to taste the ale that he had been craving for the last few days. "I suppose it's as good a time as any to introduce ourselves to the crooked lawyer, Mr. Green." Bill fingered his holstered gun and grinned. "Perhaps I can persuade him to do our new documents there and then, so I don't have to worry about it anymore." "Exactly," Frank said enthusiastically. "We'll be free to move on whenever we want as soon as that's done. And I can make a few discreet inquiries about whether Levi Ware has been seen around these parts." Bill scowled, wishing the bounty hunter had gotten himself shot long ago. Although it was rather flattering that there was a price on his head, he thought. At least it meant that he was a man of significance, and it amused him to run rings around the law. "It's been a pleasure doing business with you," Bill said jovially a few hours later, shaking hands with Mr. Green outside his grand home. He slid the documents into his inner coat pocket and patted it with a satisfied smile. It had been easier than he thought to persuade the crooked lawyer to sign the paperwork that would give him and his gang new names for whenever they wanted to leave this life of crime behind. "You too." Mr. Green glanced nervously up and down the street, relieved to see it was quiet at that particular moment. "And remember, if anyone asks, we've never met." "Quit worrying," Bill chuckled. He stepped closer to the lawyer, and his eyes turned cold. "How about you remember that we've never met, even if the sheriff comes asking awkward questions or someone dangles money in front of you?" "Of course," Green said hastily. "I get how this works, and my lips are sealed. You have my word." He tried and failed to keep his gaze from drifting down toward Bill Whitley's gun and the way his hand frequently hovered near it. "Are you staying in Rocky River for long? This backwater?" Bill scoffed. He had a sudden longing for the wide-open spaces of California and a pretty woman on his arm. "Certainly not, although I have a few bits of business to take care of before we leave, if you get my drift." He tapped the side of his nose and winked, enjoying the way Mr. Green smiled and nodded obsequiously. He hadn't lost his touch to instill respect, or perhaps it was fear in everyone he met. "Come on, Bill. A man could die of thirst waiting for you to stop chatting," Frank called. Mr. Green bobbed his head one more time and scurried back into his home, relieved to close the door behind him. There was something about the glint in Bill Whitley's eye that made him wonder if the man enjoyed threatening people for fun. There was a certain swagger to Bill's gait as he walked with his men through Rocky River. The future was looking better than it had for a while, and his thoughts turned to whether they could pull off one last job before hanging up his gun. The idea of robbing a stagecoach, or perhaps even stealing gold bullion from the train, appealed to him, and he mulled it over as they headed toward the saloon at the far end of town. His dark eyes didn't stop scanning the street for one moment, and he paused several times to ask some of the unsuspecting locals whether they had heard of anyone called Levi Ware. It seemed that the bounty hunter had never been to Rocky River, according to their nervous replies, which gave him some peace of mind. Rocky River was the sort of quaint country town he hated. It was far too wholesome, full of folks who tried to engage in friendly conversation no matter how much he glared at them. But as long as it was the sort of place that Levi Ware wouldn't think of looking for the Whitley gang, he supposed it would serve its purpose until he was ready to move on somewhere better. "We can stay in the saloon for a couple of hours, can't we?" Frank asked. He was already rubbing his hands together with anticipation as they approached the Black Crow Saloon. It had a slightly run-down air about it, which suited them. Bill nodded. I guess so. Just don't get so drunk that you speak out of turn. I don't want to attract the wrong sort of attention. He led his men into the saloon, pleased to see that it was almost empty. That was just how he liked it. A jaded-looking woman was wiping down the tables, and an old man was playing the piano in a lackluster fashion. Bill was half tempted to stride over and slam the lid of the piano closed over the man's knuckles so that he could have a bit of peace and quiet, but decided against it. 3 drinks for you, gentlemen? The saloon owner was wearing a brown leather apron with rolled-up shirt sleeves, and he leaned on the counter, giving them a welcoming smile. What's it to be? Whiskey or beer? How about both? Burton pushed past Bill and grabbed the drink that the saloon owner had already poured. He gulped the ale down like a man with a raging thirst and then slammed the empty tankard back onto the counter, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Keep them coming, he said with a grin. Bill turned his back to the counter and looked around the room with a sneer on his face. Another dead-end saloon in a place he didn't want to be. He was tired of hiding and looking over his shoulder, waiting for Levi Ware to catch up with them. His thoughts drifted to what the future might hold. And he was only vaguely aware of the man's voice behind him, asking what he wanted to drink several times. The barman tapped him on his shoulder to get his attention, and, without thinking, Bill spun around and grabbed the unfortunate man by his collar, dragging him over the counter so his feet were left paddling in the air. What do you want? Bill snarled. I was just asking what you want to drink, the saloon owner mumbled. His eyes bulged as Bill's grip tightened, and he felt the cold kiss of a knife blade against his throat. Just didn't want you to get thirsty while your friends are drinking, he croaked. Leave him be, Frank said, rolling his eyes slightly as he nudged his brother good-naturedly. He'll have a whiskey, and make sure it's your best one. Burton chimed in, already on his 3rd drink. Bill released the man and put his knife away, shaking his head slightly. He hadn't even remembered pulling the knife out. Sure, I'll be right back. The saloon owner hurried away to fetch a new bottle of whiskey. He didn't want any complaints from these customers, that was for sure. He knew trouble when he saw it, and these strangers were not to be crossed. What's gotten into you today? Frank muttered. I thought you'd be pleased now that the lawyer took care of the paperwork. Bill scowled. His good mood had already evaporated, and he knew it was because there was still unfinished business to tend to before he could really be happy. Let me worry about that. Isn't it what I always do? Frank grabbed the next couple of drinks the bartender had already poured and retreated to the end of the counter, where Burton was trying to engage the woman in conversation without much luck. This is my best whiskey, the saloon owner said as he returned. Shall I just leave the bottle here for you? Bill nodded and fixed the man with a cold stare. Have you heard of a man called Levi Ware in these parts? He demanded. Rides a black stallion by all accounts. Black stallion? No, there's nobody like that in Rocky River. The bartender's gaze slid to the door, and he prayed that he was right. It wasn't a name he was familiar with, and he knew most folks, but he didn't want that sort of trouble in his saloon. Bill swiftly drank 2 shots of whiskey and then splashed another measure into his glass. He strolled to the end of the counter. Do you think there's anything worth robbing in this town? He asked Frank and Burton in a low voice. I've gotten a taste for wiping the smile off a few of the smug faces here with their happy lives, he added sourly. I thought you said we were just laying low for now, Frank reminded him. Besides, it doesn't look like the kind of place where we could make much money, he added with a shrug. He sometimes wished his brother could relax and enjoy a few pleasant hours with some drinks like most men, instead of pacing like a caged lion, always looking for the next opportunity. There's always money to be made, Bill said wearily. It's just that you two don't have the sense to see easy pickings, even when it's right under your noses. He sighed morosely. There's something about this place that's making me feel uneasy, he muttered to himself. He glanced around the saloon again, hoping to figure out what it was, but the answer remained elusive. Have some more whiskey. That'll soon help you feel better. Burton grinned and poured some of the amber liquid out for himself, but then thought better of it as he caught the flash of anger in Bill's eyes. He could be unpredictable in this sort of mood, so he slid the glass toward his cousin. "Here you go?" Bill sank it in one mouthful and jammed the stopper back in the top of the bottle. "I'm going back up the street to make a few inquiries and see if I can find out about the bank," he said in a low voice. "I reckon we might be able to intercept a delivery of money if I can think of a way to distract the sheriff's attention." Frank and Burton grinned at each other and slapped Bill on his back as he strolled away. Things were looking up, and a nice bank robbery would be a good way to give the town something to remember them by. Bill stepped back outside and started walking along the street, deep in thought. Suddenly, the sound of laughter caught his attention, and his head snapped up just in time to see a sight he had long imagined. A horse and wagon rolled past, with sacks of what looked like flour in the back. But what made the anger burn deep in his belly was the sight of who was sitting on the wooden seat up front. The wagon was being driven by a broad-shouldered man, and as they passed, he lifted his hat in greeting to someone. The sun glinted off his blonde hair, and Bill clenched his fists. He would know that face anywhere, even though it had been almost 10 years since he had seen it. Jesse Rogers. Jesse Rogers. The man who had persuaded Angeline and baby Lily that she would be better off out of Bill's life. His fists clenched by his side, and he ground his teeth, but then the hint of a smile curved on his mouth. He had also gotten a good view of the woman sitting next to Jesse. The breeze lifted her glossy hair, and in her arms, she was holding a cherubic-looking baby girl whose blonde curls reminded him so much of Lily that it felt like he had been punched in the stomach. The woman looked down to adjust the baby's bonnet, and Bill watched from the shadows as Jesse turned toward her with an intense expression on his face that she didn't notice. Bill knew what it was. It was the look of someone who was very much in love. He turned on his heel and strode back into the saloon. His boots were loud on the wooden floor, and the piano stalled to a halt in a jangle of tuneless chords as the old man hobbled away at the sight of Bill pulling his gun and pointing it directly at the saloon owner. Jesse Rogers, the man who just passed on his wagon, headed up the street. Where does he live? Jesse? The man's voice trembled. You heard me. Don't make me ask again. Bill walked closer to the counter, ignoring the gasps of surprise from Frank and Burton. I ain't sure. Bill cocked his pistol and smiled. I mean, you'll find his place just out of town. Greendale Ranch, with a flour mill, too. Bill held his gun up for a moment longer, then lowered his hand, chuckling as the saloon owner shuffled away to his back room to recover. Are you sure it was him? Frank demanded. Oh, yes. I'll never forget his face. Bill yanked the stopper out of the bottle of whiskey and took a long slug. Better still, if I'm not mistaken, Jesse Rogers is in love. He is? Burton ambled over to join them. Lucky him, he mumbled. What does that mean for us? Bill asked, taking another swig of whiskey. It was a rhetorical question that he didn't expect his men to have the first clue how to answer. It means that he stands to lose even more than I hoped for when I pay him a little visit. He chuckled. He'll regret the day he ever crossed Bill Whitley. Chapter 10. Jesse paused from his task of scything weeds around the edge of the wheat field and pushed his hat to the back of his head, grateful to take a break for a few minutes. The early summer sun was hot on his back, and the air was full of birdsong and the hum of insects. Life is good. He smiled at the simplicity of those 3 words as they slipped through his mind, also feeling slightly shocked that they were true for what felt like the first time since his pa had died. He glanced up into the clear blue sky. Thank you, Lord, he said slowly. It wouldn't do to take his good fortune for granted and not acknowledge that it was thanks to God his life had taken a better path. In the distance, he could see Faye settling baby Rose in the shade of the large oak tree near the vegetable garden, and his heart lifted at the sight of them. Several weeks had passed since their conversation when she had nearly been bitten by the rattlesnake, and he was surprised to discover that he had gotten accustomed to having them at Greendale Ranch. In fact, accustomed was an understatement, he thought, with a rueful smile. More like he looked forward to seeing Faye any time he returned to the homestead, and would seek her out if she wasn't in the kitchen, just to fill her in on a few tidbits of news from the ranch. Of course, nothing more. And as for Rose, he had started to find himself irresistibly drawn to her as well, sneaking over to her crib when Faye and his ma's attention was elsewhere to pull faces that made her giggle. And yesterday, his heart had squeezed with happiness when he had reached into the crib to brush one of her curls off her forehead, and Rose had fastened her tiny hand around one of his fingers with a determined grip and looked up at him with a gummy smile, as though she was happy to see him. After all the years of building an impenetrable wall around his heart and telling himself that he was doing just fine with just the company of his ma and his animals, his defenses had crumbled within a few short months of the arrival of two strangers. Not that they were strangers anymore. Lately, when Jesse laid his head on his pillow at night and closed his eyes, it was Faye's heart-shaped face that filled his mind. And he could have described every contour of her face and what each of Rose's different cries and gurgles meant to a complete stranger without even having to pause to think. At first, he had found her resolute determination to care for Rose puzzling. But when he overheard Faye mentioning to his ma that the doctor had doubted she might bear children, it all fell into place. And now, a plethora of different feelings were growing inside him. Admiration for her courageous move west, traveling hundreds of miles away from everything she knew, based on his plain old advertisement for a wife, and gratitude for the way she cared for Elena without ever being patronizing or throwing her weight around in the jobs that his mom might not want to let go of. Also, if he was being honest with himself, he was attracted to everything about her. Not just her grace and natural beauty, but the way she hummed as she went about her chores and remembered what they had talked about, down to every tiny detail of the ranch, doing her best to fit in with a lifestyle that he knew was very different from what she'd grown up with. If Mrs. Devereaux were to match me with the perfect woman to marry, I reckon it would be Faye, he commented to Robin, who had trotted over to the fence to look over at what his master was doing. The horse snickered, making Jesse grin. "You agree, don't you, boy?" He tipped the scythe over his shoulder and glanced up at the sun. It was time to head back to the homestead. He had freshly milled flour to deliver to the mercantile and a new bakery in town that afternoon, and he wanted to see Faye before he left. He had heard Rose fretting in the night, and Elena had mentioned that she might be sickening for something, so if she needed the doctor, he wanted to know. As he strolled back toward the barns, a sudden glint of light caught his eye way on the far side of his ranch. He paused and watched for a moment, feeling a prickle of foreboding. Although he hadn't mentioned it to the women, Jesse couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched during the last few days. It was nothing he could put his finger on or point to definitively. Just a feeling. A sense that something bad was going to happen to snatch his newfound happiness away. He shaded his eyes and scanned his paddocks and the mountains beyond. The cattle were grazing calmly, the horses were standing under a tree, swishing their tails against the flies and looking drowsy from the heat. "Maybe the heat's getting to me too," he muttered. He must have imagined it. "Are you coming in for a glass of Faye's lemonade and some lunch before you go into town, son?" Elena stood up from the rocking chair on the veranda as she caught sight of him. "Sounds good." He bent over and sluiced his head and shoulders under the pump, enjoying the shock of cold water, before hurrying back to the cabin. He could hear Rose crying out in the garden, and a shadow of worry crossed his face, which Elena noticed. "It's probably just her first teeth coming through," she said to reassure him. "Are you sure? Maybe I should call in to see Dr. Mundy, just in case. I could ask him to visit this evening. Poor Faye must be exhausted if Rose was crying all night." Jesse caught his ma staring at him curiously. "What? I'm just making sure it's nothing serious," he muttered, feeling defensive. "You like her, don't you, Jesse? And Rose as well?" "Well, of course I do," he mumbled. "They're easy company, and Faye works hard." Elena tidied up her knitting on the veranda table and followed his gaze as he watched Faye in the garden. She had picked Rose up to soothe her, and the simple scene of a mother and baby filled his heart with a sudden and unexpected longing. "You should tell her how you feel," Elena said firmly. It's only down to her caring nature that Faye hasn't already visited Mrs. Devereux to look at the gentlemen on her books who want to marry, you know. She coughed, sounding wheezy, and her eyes twinkled for a moment. I don't think she'll leave while she thinks I'm struggling. Have you been pretending you're ill? Jessie was shocked at the idea. No, don't be silly. You know the doctor said my heart isn't so good. Elena sniffed and turned away. She's a wonderful woman, son. And I haven't often interfered in the choices you've made over the years, have I? Jessie took his hat off and twisted it in his hands. His mother was right. I guess not. Well, this time I'm going to speak my mind, Elena continued. It's 10 years since that business with Angeline and Lily, and you're still clinging on to that guilt like some sort of protection against getting on with your life. But what if the Whitley gang finds us again, Ma? I didn't want to say anything, but I've gotten this feeling that something bad is going to happen if I let my guard down. What if I tell Faye how I feel and everything goes wrong? Elena sighed and patted his arm. What if it doesn't, she said, smiling up at him. The Lord will take care of us, Jessie. I know he will. There was nothing Jessie could say to counter her simple response. Why don't you go hold Rose for a little while before you go into town? I think Faye would appreciate your help. The door swung shut behind Elena as she retreated to the coolness of the cabin, and Jessie realized his ma was right. He was tired of being scared of Bill Whitley and his cronies tracking them down. It was time to draw a line in the dirt and make some changes, and the first thing he needed to do was to be honest with Faye about his past. Can I help you with Rose? Jessie felt shy as he made the offer, wondering whether Faye would refuse. He wouldn't blame her after the way he had been so reluctant to welcome the baby into his home. Her cheeks were pink from the exertion of digging the crumbly dirt where she had decided to make an extra plot to grow more produce for them. And Jessie thought she looked more beautiful than ever. Thank you. That would be wonderful. His heart lifted as Faye settled Rose into the crook of his arm. With her standing so close, he could see the violet flecks in her blue eyes, and he couldn't help but smile when she glanced up at him. Rose waved a pudgy fist before trying to stuff her hand into her mouth to chew on it. Ma reckons it might be a tooth coming through? I think so. She's a little feverish as well, but I'm sure it will pass in a couple of days. Faye gathered up the last few salad leaves she had harvested for their evening meal and put them in her basket. She likes you, she murmured. Look how well she's settled now. Jessie followed Faye toward the pump and levered the handle for her so she could fill a bucket of water to take to the chickens in their coop. I'll take her again now, shall I? Elena said you're heading into town later, and I wouldn't want you to be late. As Faye lifted Rose from his arms, their hands brushed, and Jessie felt a surge of emotion. I've been thinking, he started. Yes? Faye smiled up at him, almost making him forget what he wanted to say. The thing is, are you considering asking Mrs. Devereux to find you a husband? He blurted out. I mean, it's not my place to stop you, of course. He frowned as the corner of Faye's mouth twitched with amusement. This conversation wasn't going quite as he'd planned in his mind during all those hours he'd imagined it while he was out working the land. A husband? What makes you ask? I'd rather you didn't visit Mrs. Devereux, Jessie said. He waited to see if she would be angry, but Faye just gave him a small nod. I take my housekeeping duties seriously, Mr. Rogers. That's why I'm here after all. Jessie sighed. I thought we'd agreed to dispense with formalities. He took a deep breath and plunged on. I don't want you to leave and marry someone else because I've realized I have feelings for you, Faye. I've gotten very fond of having you and Rose here. Faye lifted her chin and gave him a direct stare. I appreciate your candor, Jessie, but you're right. I have been thinking about the future. Her cheeks flushed in a way Jessie found quite adorable. Could it be with me? With us at Greendale Ranch? Jessie's heart flipped and flopped in his chest, but then sank with her next words. I've prayed about this, and I would like Rose to have a proper pa in her life when the time is right. Faye looked down again, and her expression was hard for him to read. I'm not sure what it is you're suggesting, she continued, but I can't be with a man who isn't honest about his past, and you were very certain that you didn't want children. Jessie seized her hand and pulled her closer, leaning forward to gently brush a kiss on her lips. The warmth of her mouth under his made him want to hold her and Rose in his arms forever, but he knew he needed to behave like a gentleman. It was what Faye deserved. I've realized I said I didn't want a family of my own for all the wrong reasons, Faye. I promise I'll tell you everything, he added softly, looking deep into her eyes. We'll sit out on the veranda after dinner tonight, and I'll explain it all. A look of relief and hope swept over Faye's face, telling him it was the right thing to do. He only hoped that when he finally told her the truth about his past, it wouldn't put her off, because that kiss had made him realize that he couldn't imagine a life without Faye and baby Rose by his side. Chapter 11. Faye smiled apologetically as Elena hobbled into the kitchen. Sorry if my singing disturbed you. It's such a wonderful day, and I didn't realize I was being quite so loud. My Aunt Nora used to tell me off for singing hymns at the bakery when I was baking. Never apologize for praising the Lord, Elena chuckled. You have a lovely voice, and it's good to hear you so happy. I've sliced the ham and baked some more rolls for lunch. Faye took the food to the table and added a dish of Elena's pickles. Would you teach me more about making preserves and pickles when we have a glut of fruit and vegetables in the garden? She asked casually. She knew Elena would deduce from her question that she was planning on staying at Greendale Ranch for the foreseeable future, and hoped that her conversation with Jessie later that day wouldn't change that. This looks good, Jessie said cheerfully as he came indoors a few minutes later. His blonde hair was slightly disheveled from where he had just washed after getting dusty in the mill, but Faye's breath still hitched in her chest at how good-looking she found him. It's just ham and bread, Faye replied. She could feel her cheeks turning pink as she recalled the sensation of his lips against hers, and she walked back to the counter to fetch butter, hoping that Elena wouldn't notice. I would never use the word just about your baking, Jessie said. I could smell it wafting right out of the door toward the barn. And as for that apple pie you made the other night... Jessie rubbed his stomach and glanced at Elena. Sorry, Ma, but I reckon it's every bit as good as yours. Thank goodness for that, Elena said graciously. Your pa always used to say we should never stop striving to be better, and I've learned a thing or two from Faye about baking, I don't mind admitting. I don't think you'll ever need to worry about going hungry with her taking such good care of us. Faye sat down and folded her hands, enjoying the deep rumble of Jessie's voice as he gave thanks for the blessing of good food on their table. There was a newfound sense of peace within her that she could only put down to Jessie finally starting to open up about his feelings toward her and Rose earlier that morning. Lunch passed by all too soon, and Faye already felt a tug of loss as she cleared the plates away and saw Jessie heading toward the barn to hitch Robin to the wagon. She enjoyed his company so much that she wanted to be with him all the time. Could you take this list across to him? Elena said, handing her a piece of paper. I completely forgot I need a couple of things from the mercantile. Of course, Faye hurried out, glad of the chance to be with him a few moments longer. Has Ma remembered she wants me to fetch something? Jessie expertly fitted the harness on Robin and then heaved 3 sacks of flour into the back of the wagon. Just these few things. Are you sure you don't want me to call in at Dr. Mundy's to ask him to visit and check Rose isn't sickening for something? Faye was touched by his concern. She had noticed Jessie spending more time next to Rose's crib over the last few weeks, even though he thought she hadn't seen it. He would make a good pa, she thought to herself, which was what Rose deserved. I think she's looking a bit better now. She's had a nap. Let's just see what the next few days bring. But thank you for thinking of her. I don't like seeing you worrying, he replied. And I'm always more than happy to fetch the doctor. He was good with Ma, putting our minds at rest when she first started struggling for breath, and he told her there was a problem with her heart. A shadow crossed Jessie's face, and Faye could tell that he would do anything for the people he loved. It was a heartwarming thought. He couldn't have been more different from Stanley Trent, who only cared about himself. Will you be long in town? Faye asked. She reached up to pat Robin's neck and smiled as the horse nudged her apron, hoping for a treat. "He likes apples," Jessie said, handing her some that he had already sliced. "Hold your hand flat like this, so he doesn't accidentally catch your fingers." Faye's pulse quickened as he held her hand on top of his and laid the apple in her palm. The horse's whiskers tickled as he delicately picked the apple up and munched it. Jessie kept hold of her hand for longer than was strictly necessary and looked into her eyes with an intensity she had never seen before. "I should only be gone for a few hours, hopefully. I need to make my deliveries and then pick up supplies for Ma and for mending the fences. Are you sure you'll be all right?" Jessie's gaze flickered away from her, and he scanned the fields in the distance with a slight frown. She had seen him doing it earlier, too. "We'll be fine. Is something bothering you?" Faye asked hesitantly. "I didn't want to mention it, but some days you seem a little jumpy, as though you're expecting someone or something." Jessie shook his head. "It's nothing." Faye wasn't convinced. He looked distracted and, if she wasn't mistaken, nervous too. "I'll make apple pie again for dinner tonight," she said lightly. She figured that perhaps he would tell her what was troubling him during their talk later that night. Jessie climbed up onto the wagon seat and picked up the reins. "I'll be back as quickly as I can." His gaze darted toward the boundary line again. "Stay close to the homestead while I'm gone," he added without explaining why. "Jessie, be careful, won't you?" Faye wasn't quite sure where the words had sprung from, but somehow she felt the need to say them, if only so he would know that she cared. "Sure, and like I said, there's nothing to worry about. This is Rocky River." He grinned down at her. "The sleepiest town in the West, which is just how I like it." Faye stood and watched as the wagon rolled away, wondering what his comment about staying close to the homestead had meant. But then she remembered the way his kiss had left her longing for more and smiled. He was just being gentlemanly. He knew everything to do with ranch life was still new to her, and probably didn't want her wandering off through the grass where rattlesnakes might be lurking. My dream of being with a good man might finally be coming true. The thought lifted her spirits as she bustled over to the garden to unpeg the washing and fold it in the basket next to the line. In many ways, she was glad they had only gotten to know each other slowly rather than rushing into marriage like so many mail-order brides did. If she was being honest with herself, she knew she had fallen head over heels in love with him weeks ago. In fact, she had almost told him exactly that after their kiss. Her heart raced at the thought of melting into his embrace again and their lips meeting in a lingering kiss. "Faye, you're letting your imagination run away with you too soon," she muttered, shaking her head. Things might not be the same when he explains his past. The thought dampened her ardor for a moment, but she knew it wasn't true. The way she felt about Jesse Rogers meant that she was fairly certain she would happily forgive him anything from his life before she and Rose had arrived. But it would be good for him to open up about the wariness she often sensed behind his cheerful demeanor and why it had held him back from wanting marriage and a family of his own. She was equal parts intrigued to find out more, but also hesitant that it might damage their newly blossoming love. Faye was glad to have plenty to take her mind off her whirling thoughts over the next hour. Rose seemed to have finally settled, much to her relief, so she and Elena worked together to give the kitchen a much-needed spring clean. Every dish from the dresser was washed, dried, and returned to its proper place. Then Faye scooped out the ashes from the range and put them in a bucket before brushing the floor and polishing the table with Elena's special beeswax polish. "I think you should sit and have a cup of coffee while I take the rugs out to beat them," she said once the room was sparkling. Without waiting for an answer, Faye put the coffee pot on top of the stove and cut a slice of fruitcake for Elena. "I am feeling a bit weary," Elena admitted. "Maybe it won't harm to sit for a few minutes." Faye chuckled and plumped the cushions on the chair nearest to Rose's crib. "How about making it a bit longer than a few minutes? You know how much Rose likes you reading to her." Faye knew that the only way she could persuade Elena to slow down a little was by suggesting time with the baby. Otherwise, Elena was determined to find more chores to get on with. She rolled up the rug and carried it outside, hanging it over the washing line. The carpet beater gave a satisfying whack with each swing, followed by a cloud of dust rising into the air. Just as she was about to unhook the rug and take it back inside, she noticed that the barn door was swinging loose in the breeze. That's strange. She could have sworn Jesse had hooked it open after hitching Robin to the wagon. He had told her only last week that he liked to keep fresh air blowing through the barn because it stopped the hay from getting moldy. She hurried over to hook the door back in place, picking up the bucket on her way. She may as well fill the water trough for the horses while she was out and Rose was being taken care of. It would be one less job for Jesse to do when he got back from town. A sudden movement in the deep shadow at the side of the barn made Faye's heart jump, and she felt a shiver of unease as a stranger walked out into the sunshine. It was a man she had never seen before, yet he had the air of someone who was right at home. "Good afternoon, ma'am." The stranger lifted his hat and gave her a nod. He was thick-set, with coal-black eyes and the tanned face of someone who spent most of their time outside. His jacket fit snugly across his broad shoulders, and he strolled toward her. "You must be Jesse's new woman?" Faye eyed him warily. She didn't like his overfamiliar tone, or the implication that she was the latest in a long line of women Jesse might have had in the past. But what confused her more was that Jesse hadn't mentioned that they were expecting visitors. Usually, if someone was coming, he told her. "I'm Miss Clarke," she replied. "Are you here about getting some flour milled?" She looked around and noticed that he had tethered his horse behind the mill in the shade. "What's your name?" she added, folding her arms. "No, I'm not here about getting flour milled," he said smoothly, leaving her question about his name unanswered. "I'm an old business acquaintance of Jesse's and his pa. I just happened to be passing and thought it would be good to call in for old time's sake." "Why don't you let me help you with that, Miss Clarke?" Without waiting for her reply, he pumped the handle and then grabbed the full bucket of water. "For the horses?" he asked, striding toward the trough and emptying it. He leaned on the fence and looked around as if he had all the time in the world. "I see Jesse has some nice-looking animals over yonder," he added, jerking his head toward the grazing cattle in the distance. "Yes, he does. I've just made coffee for Elena, but I told her I wouldn't be gone for long. Jesse, Mr. Rogers isn't here right now. Perhaps you could call back later or tomorrow, miss." She tried again to find out his name. The man chuckled. "I'm an old friend of the family, Miss Clarke. I'm sure Jesse won't mind me waiting for him until he gets back. He won't be long." "How do you know he won't be long?" "Just a hunch," the man said jovially. "Jesse never likes being away from home for long, and he's a creature of habit. At least he always was." He grinned at Faye. "I'm right, aren't I?" Faye found herself nodding, even though she still wasn't sure quite how this stranger knew the family. "Are you local?" she ventured. "Not really. I like to live here and there. I get bored if I stay still for too long, if you know what I mean." He smiled again. "It's lucky I hadn't already left Rocky River. I would hate to have missed seeing Jesse after all this time." As it happens, the owner of the Black Crow Saloon was more than happy to tell me all about how much Jesse's life has changed since I saw him last. A ranch, a mill, even a pretty young lady and a baby girl. He shook his head in wonder. "Well, he certainly works very hard." "Yes," the saloon owner explained everything. "I'm just glad Greendale Ranch was so easy to find. Shall I help you carry that rug inside, ma'am?" The man hoisted the rug over his shoulder, still chatting amiably about how lucky Jesse was to live in such a lovely place. "I'd call it a wonderful twist of fate that the Lord has allowed my path to cross with Jesse's again after all this time," he said jovially, following her up the steps onto the veranda. Elena was dozing in the chair as Faye led their visitor into the log cabin. She looked frail as she blinked awake, and Faye wondered whether she should have insisted the man come back the following day. "Do we have a visitor, dear?" Elena asked. She stood up stiffly, reaching for her cane. "This gentleman was passing and called in. He says he used to work with Jesse and his pa," Faye replied. "A friend of the family from way back." Elena looked puzzled and tried to peer past Faye, but the man had his back to them as he admired a picture on the wall. "A friend of the family? I'm not sure I know who that could be." Come now, Mrs. Rogers, the man said, turning round and lifting his hat off again. I worked with your husband and son for several years, and rest assured, I've never forgotten them. Faye saw the blood drain from Elena's face as the old woman clutched at her throat. Are you all right, Elena? She said, hurrying to her side. Did you stand up too fast? It's not my heart that's troubling me. It's him, Elena murmured. We're in danger, Faye, she whispered urgently. The man chuckled and threw his hat onto the table before reaching for the coffee pot. He poured himself a mug and took a long mouthful, watching them all the while with a glint of amusement in his dark eyes. If you're not going to introduce me to the young lady, Mrs. Rogers, I suppose I'll have to do it instead. He extended his hand and gripped Faye's, shaking it vigorously. I'm Bill Whitley, or the leader of the Whitley gang, as some folks like to call me. He gestured to the table and chairs. Sit down. Why don't you? We may as well enjoy another cup of coffee until Jessie returns. He undid the button on his coat and pulled his gun out, placing it carefully on the table next to the coffee pot. That's better, he said, sighing contentedly. So, tell me about the ranch, Miss Clarke. You all have gotten yourselves a nice life here, from what I can see. Chapter 12. Jessie whistled cheerfully as his wagon rumbled toward the turning for the drive to the homestead. Now that he had decided to come clean about his past with Faye, it felt as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had spent enough time in her company to know that her response to what he would share with her would be well considered and fair. If she decided she could no longer bear to be around him, he would have to pay that price, although he had been praying fervently all the way into town that she wouldn't react badly. If she can accept me, knowing that I used to be part of a gang of outlaws, then I'll know for sure she's the woman for me. Right, Robin? He said to the horse, who was trotting quicker to get home for some fresh grass. The sun was sinking low in the sky. It had taken longer than he'd thought to fetch his fencing supplies from the lumber yard because old man Foss liked to chat, and then he'd run into a trader from a neighboring town who wanted to ask about whether he would supply flour that far away. Word was getting out about his business, which was good, but he hadn't intended to be getting home as the light was starting to fade. As Jessie pulled his wagon to a halt, Robin pawed the ground and whinnied. Hush, boy, what's gotten into you? Jessie jumped down and quickly unbuckled the harness, but the horse fidgeted uneasily next to him as he led him to the field. Jessie stood quietly and looked slowly around the homestead. Everything seemed to be just as he'd left it, except for one omission. There was no candle flickering in the window of the log cabin. He felt the hairs on his arms rise, wondering whether his ma had forgotten. For as long as he could remember, she always lit a candle at dusk if he was out. Maybe Ma and Faye have gotten to talking and not realized the time. Maybe Rose is sick and they're too busy seeing to her to remember to light the candle. His heart sank as he imagined the worst for Rose, and he kicked himself for not calling for Dr. Mundy in town when he'd had the chance. He snatched up the thick leather harness and threw it into the barn. Cleaning it and hanging it up would have to wait until later. And he ran across the yard and took the veranda steps 2 at a time, bursting through the door. Is everything okay? His words faltered at the sight of Bill Whitley, sitting casually at the kitchen table with his hand resting lightly on his gun, which was pointing toward Faye. I was just wondering whether to send out a search party, Jessie, Bill said calmly. It's not like you to be out this late. What do you want? Jessie asked. His mouth had turned dry, and he risked a glance at his ma and Faye. Elena's face was ashen, and he could see that her hands were trembling in her lap. Faye's eyes were wide with fear, but he noticed that there was a steely determination in them as well, which made him love her even more. It's time to let the past go, Bill. You don't get to decide that, you low-down snake. Bill jumped up and waved his gun wildly in the air, looking unhinged. 10 long years I've waited for this moment, Jessie Rogers. How about starting by telling me where my gold is? The gold you stole from the Stockton gang, you mean? Bill's face darkened. Not that, you fool, he spat. The gold from when we robbed the stagecoach back in Montana. Jessie folded his arms, trying to appear nonchalant, his mind whirring. This was not the question he had expected. Why are you here alone? He asked. Last I heard, You were riding with Frank and Burton, Elena gasped, and Jesse shot her an apologetic smile. He had made it his business to keep his ear to the ground about the gang's whereabouts over the years, but had never told her, thinking it best she didn't know. None of your business, Bill replied airily. I want to have the pleasure of dealing with you all by myself, he added. So you're here alone and asking me for the gold I stole from you, huh? Jesse nodded slowly, then smiled. The others don't know you've already spent the money from the Stockton gold, do they, Bill? Let me guess. You've been stringing them along all this time that you'll all be able to go somewhere new and give up the life of crime so you can finally spend the money from that gold, right? You always were too smart for your own good, Bill snarled. He adjusted his grip on his pistol. Why else do you think I'm here in this godforsaken town, hiding out in the woods hoping to get lucky? Imagine my surprise when I saw you driving through town without a care in the world with her, and a baby, the image of my Lily. You leave them out of this, Jesse said in a low voice. Do you know what sort of a man he is? Bill said, turning toward Faye. Taking my Angeline and baby Lily away from me, filling her head with nonsense that she'd be better off without me. Jesse Rogers is a lying, cheating murderer, Miss Clarke. An outlaw, just like me. How about that? Jesse felt a twist of agony in his guts as he saw the shock spread across Faye's face. A liar and a cheat, perhaps, but I never killed a man, Faye, I promise. Elena shifted in her chair and put her hand over Faye's. My husband, John, made the mistake of falling in with Bill Whitley and his brother when times were tough, she explained, sounding regretful. To start with, it was just a few jobs here and there, delivering messages and acting as a lookout when they stole the occasional handful of cattle. Jesse was too young to know better, and John should never have let it go on for as long as it did. But small-time crime was never enough for you, Bill, was it? Jesse continued. And when Pa wanted to get out of the gang and make an honest living, you killed him in cold blood. His voice trembled with anger, and he saw Faye squeeze his ma's hand in sympathy. I was always destined for greater things, it's true. Bill seemed proud of his exploits, and Faye's eyes darkened with disgust at his lack of remorse. I carried out the stagecoach robbery. I also killed Abe Stockton in cold blood and stole his gold, he added, smiling to himself. They were good times until you suddenly developed a conscience, Jesse. Angeline was never more than a friend to me, Jesse growled. And boy, did she need a friend after the way you treated her and Lily. I never loved either of them, Bill remarked casually. All she ever did was complain and hold me back, and how was I supposed to do my work with a baby in our midst? But the fact that you helped them escape can't go unpunished, Jesse. You know how it works. Nobody ever walks away from Bill Whitley, Jesse muttered. He sighed. Poor Angeline and Lily ended up being shot, I heard, he said to Faye. I did my best, and it wasn't enough to keep them safe. That's why you said no family and decided against getting married, Faye said softly. She held his gaze as he nodded and then gave him a smile that melted his heart. He knew she believed him, and that was all that mattered to him at that moment. Enough of this reminiscing. I want the gold you stole from the stagecoach robbery, Jesse. Please tell me you didn't spend it all on this dusty old ranch? Jesse glanced toward the doorway, trying to calculate how he could get Bill away from his ma and Faye. It's in the barn, hidden in case I ever needed it. I knew it, Bill crowed triumphantly. He grabbed Faye, forcing her to stand up. You can come with us, my dear. I've seen the way he looks so lovingly at you, and if he tries to get the better of me, I shall take great pleasure in shooting you, just like I shot his pa. I'll walk with you, Faye said, giving Bill a cool look. She shook his hand off her shoulder. If Jesse says the gold is in the barn, then there's no need for all this nonsense. You'll have what you want, and then you can leave us alone and get on with your life. Bill gripped her arm again. You're far too trusting, Miss Clarke. You don't know Jesse like I do, so I want you right by my side. You're forgetting he's an outlaw. Faye smiled up at Jesse and raised one eyebrow slightly. It was a look he recognized as if she were asking him a question. He gave her a slight nod and opened the door for them all to go outside. I know Jesse well enough to trust him with my life, Mr. Whitley, Faye countered. Perhaps he used to be an outlaw in your company, but that's not who he really is. Not now. Elena struggled to her feet, but Jesse held his hand up. Ma and baby Rose are to stay inside, and I want your word that you won't hurt them, Bill. As long as I have your dear sweetheart Miss Clarke with me until you hand the gold over, in case you think of double-crossing me, I think I can agree to that, Bill replied in a sing-song voice that made Jesse wonder if he had lost his grip on reality. Bill glared at Elena and waved his gun in her direction for good measure. Don't even think of interfering, old woman. Is that clear? As Jesse led the way toward the barn, his mind raced. He needed a way of distracting Bill for long enough to get Faye out of harm's way. This was not her vendetta to be part of. He took a deep breath. Now that the very thing he had dreaded for all these years was actually happening, it felt oddly liberating. Bill Whitley was no longer in the shadows of his imagination. He was right here, in the flesh. Jesse just had to figure out how to end this once and for all. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a plume of dust rising at the end of the driveway. He cocked his head and heard the thrum of hoofbeats. They had a visitor, but there was no time to waste waiting to see who it was. Hurry up, you fool. Bill had heard it too. He jammed his gun into Faye's back and pushed her roughly toward the barn door, which was still hooked open. Where's the gold, then? He growled, looking at Jesse. It's in the corner, just past the hay, Jesse replied. He turned to look at Faye, knowing that he only had seconds to tell her what was on his mind. I love you, Faye. Look after Ma and Rose for me, won't you? Faye's eyes shimmered with tears, and he wished he could pull her into his arms and protect her from everything that was happening. Enough of this. Get the gold, Jesse, before your visitor arrives, and I have to shoot them too. Jesse nodded. I'm sorry I never got to teach you to ride Robin, he muttered, holding Faye's gaze. It's the only thing I really wanted to do. Dawning comprehension came into her eyes, and she gave him an almost imperceptible nod. The gold is hidden behind a wooden panel, Jesse said, turning back to Bill. Pass me that hammer so I can prise it open. Bill looked around the gloomy barn. Where? I don't see it. By your feet. Just kick it toward me. Don't worry, I won't use it on you. I nailed the wood shut years ago, and I can't open it with my bare hands. Bill grabbed a lamp, which cast a feeble light around them, and grunted with satisfaction as he saw the hammer lying on the floor, where Jesse had left it earlier. He bent over to pick it up, and in that split second, Faye grabbed Robin's leather harness that Jesse had thrown inside the barn and whipped it over Bill's back, sending him sprawling. The gun skittered from his hand across the floor. Run, Faye! Run! Jesse sprang forward to grab the gun. But Bill was faster than a striking snake, scrambling back on his feet. They both reached for the gun at the same time. A shot rang out, and Jesse crashed to the floor. The last thought in his mind was the memory of Faye, standing in the dappled sunlight with Rose in her arms, and he wished with all his heart he had been able to call her his wife. Chapter 13. Jesse! Jesse! Wake up! Faye knelt down and pressed her ear against his chest. There was a dark smear of blood across his shirt, but his strong heart was still beating, and she felt a wave of relief, the like of which she had never known in all her life. A sob of happiness escaped from her lips. Jesse, I love you. You're still alive. She looked down and smiled happily as his eyes opened and gradually focused on her. What? Where? Jesse sat bolt upright and shook his head to try and clear the confusion. Howdy, you must be Jesse Rogers? A deep voice said. This is Levi Ware, Faye said. She gestured toward the man standing behind her with his boot firmly planted on Bill Whitley's back. Crimson blood oozed onto the dirt floor from the gunshot wound in Bill's shoulder, and his low groan of pain echoed around the barn. Levi lifted his hat and nodded by way of introduction. I think my bullet must have gone straight through Whitley's shoulder and grazed past you. Sorry about that, but it was hard to get a clean shot with you both fighting. The blood isn't yours, Jesse, Faye said. Bill collapsed on top of you, and you hit your head on the corner of the barrel of molasses as you fell. I've been tracking the Whitley gang for years, Levi explained. He pulled a piece of rope from his pocket and swiftly lashed Bill's hands tightly behind his back before dragging him into a sitting position against the barn wall. You won't get away with this. Bill mumbled. My men will be here any minute. Frank and Burton? Levi chuckled. I don't think so. They're enjoying a night in Rocky River Jail under the care of Sheriff Jackson. I found them drunk in the Black Crow Saloon, and they couldn't wait to tell me where you were in exchange for me not shooting them. So much for loyalty in the gang, huh? Jesse remarked. Cowards, the lot of them, Levi shrugged. I'll get my bounty money, and Wyoming will be rid of 3 murderers. Wait, a crafty gleam came into Bill Whitley's eyes. I could make you a wealthy man in return for my freedom, Mr. Ware. More money than you'll ever make from tracking down outlaws. What do you think? I know where the gold is, and we could split it between us. More for you than me, of course, he added with a hint of regret. Don't you ever stop, Faye demanded. You steal and kill, thinking nothing of it. Jesse has turned his life around. Why don't you do the same? Bill rolled his eyes. Give up on what I do best, Miss Clarke. Every man has his price, and I'm sure Levi won't turn down the opportunity to take the easiest money he's ever made in his life in return for letting me go. He isn't the law, after all. Just a man trying to make a living. What about your brother and cousin? Faye asked. Levi's told me there are 3 of you. Them? If those 2 fools can't stay sober for long enough not to get caught, they deserve everything that's coming to them. All I need is a bit of this gold, and I'll be on my way. None of you will ever see me again. There's just one problem, Jesse said. He leaned on Faye as she helped him up. She looked up at him, wondering what else might be revealed on this strange evening. I gave the gold to Angeline to help her escape with Lily, Jesse continued casually. What? Bill Whitley's exclamation sounded like a howl of pain and disbelief. You gave that woman my gold? Faye felt laughter bubbling up inside her chest, and without thinking, she stood on her tiptoes and pressed a kiss on Jesse's lips. I always knew you were a good man, she whispered. There never was anything hidden in the barn, was there? Jesse pulled her closer, and for a moment, Faye felt as though it was just the 2 of them, cocooned in the moment. When Pa wanted to leave the gang, and then Bill Whitley shot him, I vowed I would never get sucked back into it. Giving the gold to Angeline was my way of trying to make something good out of all the bad things that happened. I wanted her and Lily to have enough money to never have to fear Bill again. Well, look how that ended, Bill said with a spiteful laugh. Angeline was shot by a rival gang for her troubles, and Lily perished too. So much for you trying to do a good deed, Jesse. You were a failure then, and you're not much better now. You reckon she was shot, huh? Levi said lightly. Bill turned to look at the bounty hunter, his eyes suddenly full of uncertainty. That's what I heard. Levi sighed and grinned, shaking his head. The McMahon gang might be robbers, but they don't like to see women badly treated, Bill. And believe me, your reputation for treating women badly was known far and wide. Angeline was like a thorn in my side, Bill spluttered defensively, his eyes narrowed. Are you telling me the McMahons didn't shoot her? Faye felt Jesse tense next to her, and she knew just how much was riding on Levi's answer. I sure am. Last I heard, Angeline is happily married to a merchant somewhere far away, with Lily and 2 other children, thanks to the McMahons letting her keep some of the gold Jesse gave her. No. This time there was real rage in Bill's voice, and he scrambled to his feet and lowered his head, intent on charging into Jesse. I think it's time for you to leave, Mr. Whitley, Faye said coolly. She stuck her foot out, and Bill tripped over it, smashing to the floor again and yelling with pain as he landed on his injured shoulder. We'll be on our way, Levi said, hauling Bill to his feet again. I'm going to get a lot of pleasure from seeing the Whitley gang get what they deserve. I hear the traveling judge is arriving in Rocky River first thing tomorrow morning. I'll be sure to mention that it was thanks to you 2 that we can finally put them away for good. The evening air felt cool on Faye's face as they watched Levi Ware ride away on his black stallion, leading Bill's horse next to him. Bill's hands were still tightly bound, and he slumped low on his saddle, all the fight gone out of him. What do you suppose the judge will say? She asked quietly. They'll get what they deserve, Jesse replied. Do you? His words hung in the air, full of uncertainty and longing. Do I believe you? Faye turned toward him and reached for his hands. They felt large and comforting, the sort of hands you could entrust your life to. "Yes, I do," she said simply. "Your pa was just doing what he thought right for his family, and he paid the ultimate price for having anything to do with Bill and his gang." She reached up and stroked Jesse's cheek, looking deep into his green eyes. "You're a good man, Jesse. It's time to believe me when I tell you that." "I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything sooner," Jesse replied. "I wanted to so many times, but I was always afraid you'd leave with Rose once you knew about my past, and I wouldn't have blamed you. I was an outlaw. I got tangled up in a life of crime for a while there, and I'm not proud of it. But you made it right in the end," said Faye softly. Jesse grinned. "I'm so happy that Angeline and Lily got away. Are you still in love with her?" This time it was Jesse's turn to finish what was unsaid. Faye gave a small nod. She had to be sure. "No, I thought it was love when I was trying to help her get away. But with hindsight, I think I was young and mixed up, trying to do the gentlemanly thing. Besides, now that I know what falling in love really feels like, it's very different." "Falling in love? Who with?" Faye's question was ended by Jesse's lips tenderly pressing on hers in a heartfelt kiss that made her pulse quicken. "I love you, Faye," Jesse said, pulling away slightly and holding her in his arms so he could see her face more clearly. "I know it hasn't been the easiest few months for you and Rose settling into our way of life, but will you marry me? I want to take care of you both forever." "Are you sure about being a father to Rose?" Faye asked. "I love you both," Jesse said with a chuckle. "In fact, I think she has me wrapped around her little finger already, and Ma's as well. What do you say? Shall we speak to Pastor Franklin when we go into town next?" he asked eagerly. Faye stepped closer and rested her hands on his broad chest as the breeze whispered in the grass and the first stars started to come out in the velvety black sky overhead. "Jesse Rogers," she said, feeling more sure about it than ever. "Nothing would make me happier than being your wife and having you as Rose's pa." The door of the log cabin creaked open, and the sound of Rose's contented giggles drifted toward them as Elena stepped out onto the veranda with Rose in her arms. "Did the bounty hunter take Whitley away yet?" Elena called. "I watched it all but didn't come out, like you told me." "He sure did," Jesse said. He sighed happily and pulled Faye close again, this time giving her a kiss that lingered tantalizingly on her lips and promised a lifetime of love together. "Shall we have a cup of coffee, Ma?" he asked as they walked toward the cabin a moment later. "You and Faye have a wedding to plan, and I want to tell baby Rose just how cherished she's going to be." Faye felt her heart swell with happiness as she looked up at Jesse by her side. He was everything she had ever dreamt of and more, and the Lord had blessed them with Rose. She couldn't wait for them to become a proper family. She paused on the veranda as Jesse went ahead of her, wanting to mark the moment with the gratitude it deserved. "Thank you, Jillian, for entrusting me with baby Rose, and thank you, Lord, for bringing this kind-hearted man into our lives." Her silent prayer drifted up into the sky like the wood smoke from the chimney of their home, Greendale Ranch. The end. Thank you for listening to this free audiobook, and we hope you enjoyed it. Martha Gillcrest writes clean romance stories that sweep you away to when times were simpler with plenty of love and adventure to entertain you. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like it with a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. That way, you will always know when a new audiobook has been added for your listening pleasure.